Yes, Sue, it's some 12 years since Formula One has had to come to terms with a driver fatality, but that doesn't make it any easier to come to terms with the death yesterday of the very popular Austrian Roland Ratzenberger. Jonathan Palmer, how do you gauge the mood around Imola today?
Well, I think on the face of it, it's sort of business as usual, but of course, you don't have to go very far beneath the skin to realise it's put a massive dampener on the weekend. Formula One, though, of course, is a very professional operation. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with the circuit or any of the safety standards around, and it's only appropriate that the meeting carries on. Indeed, Ratzenberger would have wanted that himself. But I think it's important that does happen, it does go on, and it's one of these situations in which either people pack up and go home, or they just refocus, commit themselves to what they're doing, and get on with it, and that's what's happening.
They're certainly not packing up and going home, they're all leaving the pit lane right at this moment. But the drivers have had to make a lot of adaptations, given the new rule changes. Well, that have played a part in what happened, not only for Roland, but also in the violent accident with Barrichello on Friday.
I really don't think the current regulations have done anything to contribute towards these incidents. I think that both the ones that we've seen with Barrichello and Ratzenberger, there's no evidence that they are due to the new regulations, which undoubtedly make the cars harder to drive. So I don't think we've got anything to fear on that count.
Roland Ratzenberger's team, Simtech, remain in the lineup today, and David Brabham will drive. That surprised a few people, I think.
Yes, I think perhaps it has, but the team are very confident that there is nothing wrong with the car in terms of its design or its construction. They're confident that no mistake was made in terms of its assembly, and therefore I think they feel that it's the right thing to do to carry on a race. David Brabham has taken the very courageous decision to race in these circumstances, and of course we all wish them the very best for this difficult race for them.
The car's heading for the grid and a very good racing prospect, isn't it?
Oh, I think we have. I think getting back to the front, we've got the season's favourite Senna, who's certainly struggling with 0 points. Schumacher has won the first two. These two are really locked together. It's a real needle match, and today's going to be a very important race for Senna.
Jonathan, thanks. We'll hear from you a little more a bit later.
Very much. Thank you indeed.
And yes, here at Imola, the grid will be forming in the next few minutes for the start of the San Marino Grand Prix, which is scheduled for 1 o'clock UK time, 2 o'clock local time. It's warm, weather conditions and track conditions are ideal. And there's no disguising the fact that after 2 non-finishes, today is the day that Ayrton Senna really must make his first move in this 1994 World Championship. Imola is known as an out-and-out power circuit, which certainly suits the Williams-Renaults a little more than it might suit Michael Schumacher's Benetton Ford. And Ayrton Senna has duly taken pole position, the 65th pole position of his career, but Schumacher, 2 wins out of 2, is right alongside him on the front row. The Ferrari of Gerhard Berger qualifying on the second row, that's put a few thousand more on the gate here at Imola. Damon Hill alongside Berger, Damon with continuing frustrations, some way off the pace of his teammate Senna, but at least Damon's got points on the board. Ayrton Senna must open his account today. The start to the season couldn't have been worse for Ayrton Senna. First of all, spinning out of his home Grand Prix in Brazil. That was in pursuit of a dominant first-round winner, Michael Schumacher. And in the Pacific Grand Prix at Aida in Japan, the pursuit resumed but didn't get past the first corner. As Senna crashed out, Schumacher headed off to win number 2. So Schumacher 20 points, Senna 0 as they came to Imola. And Murray Walker spoke to them before qualifying began.
Michael, because Benetton and Ford and you were ready at the beginning of the season, you have a big bonus. Now, are you expecting the gap to close?
Certainly, I mean, there is no doubt about this. And I think, in particular, this circuit is very suitable for the Williams-Renault-Senna team. And I believe this race will be for them, and then the gap will be already closed. And I'm not so ambitious now to believe already I have won the World Championship. There's just 2 races gone. They were very good for us. They were very bad for Ayrton Senna. But there's another 14 races to come, and this is what I see in the moment.
We are here in this 3rd round, the European season, starting now, starting from 0. So basically our championship starts here, 14 races, not 16. And it's not a comfortable position to be in, but that's the reality, and the team is conscious about the challenge we have to make to recover the ground over Benetton, as well the technical development that we must be able to do to improve our car performance.
For me, the satisfying feeling is that we had this already last year. The team has done in strategies fantastic last year, in pit stop fantastic last year, and the fantastic feeling is that we kept this and we even developed this, and the team is doing so well, and that's, as I said, I see from every corner doing 100%, and that makes me so excited.
We have some problems, but I think we have a good car, and I think we have a good engine too. We just have to work on these problems at this moment, which the team is doing, and for that we have some modifications here at the Imola, which we shall be trying the next 2 days, hoping to improve part of the difficulties we have found so far.
A lot of people here who should know better are saying, yes, Benetton won in Brazil, and yes, Benetton and Ford together won in Japan, but now we're at a power circuit. The Williams with the Renault engine is going to blow them away. What do you have to say to that?
I think that is the thing I said in the beginning. I have this feeling that the power advantage of the Renault Williams will be much more the point here than it was in Aida, for sure. And I think they have the best chance now here to win this race, closing the gap, and for the whole season I see still Williams as the main contender.
Now, you've won here 3 times already. You really do need to make it 4.
I would love to.
Ayrton Senna anxious for his first win of the season at a circuit where Williams have won, 3 times in the last 4 years. Damon Hill on row 2. What's the mood in the Williams camp?
Well, Ferrari just started up there.
If they don't drown you, the crowd will.
Well, hopefully that's the last we'll hear of them this afternoon. Yes, it's going to be a very, very close fight. Ferrari have got a fantastic engine. They test here a lot, so they're competitive. Benetton, I believe, are struggling more here than they have done the last couple of races, and we've made improvements, so I'm optimistic.
Power circuit, they all say. What is the engine advantage you feel you might have today?
Well, I have to say, I think that the Renault engine is still one of the better engines in Formula One, but I have to say I think that the competition has closed the gap enormously, and any feeling that the Ford engine is a long way behind us is, I think, misplaced. I think that certainly the Ferrari's got enormous horsepower.
Row 2 for you. What particular problems have you had in qualifying?
Well, I had a bit of a bad first day, and yesterday was obviously a particularly bad day for everyone. But I felt that I'm prepared now for the race, and I've got a good chance and a good setup, and I'm really ready to go.
Tough circuit. Is a circuit you enjoy, Imola?
Yeah, it's an exciting track, yes.
It's going to be an exciting race. Hope you go well, Dave. OK, we'll get a few more opinions from some of the British drivers a little further back down the grid in the next few minutes. Let's get some early opinions, though, from Murray Walker in the commentary box.
Well, let us not forget that Imola is the spiritual home of Ferrari, and the Table Tifosi, the fanatical Italian followers of Ferrari. We're looking at the present moment at the Sauber of Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who's new to the Sauber team, German driver from Mönchengladbach, and he's driving the Sauber with the British-made Mercedes-Benz engine in it, which, like the Ferrari engine, is tremendously powerful. And Frentzen has been showing his teammate, his more experienced teammate, Karl Wendlinger, the way round in the Grand Prix so far. That is Mika Häkkinen's McLaren Peugeot, and the car is getting better and better. The McLaren chassis, of course, you would expect to be good, and it is. The Peugeot V10 engine only fired up at the beginning of this year when the French concern decided that they were going to get into Formula One against their rivals Renault, who have done so well with Williams, and Peugeot have been making very heartening progress. Indeed, at one point yesterday, Martin Brundle was 4th fastest in the practice period. He then had a problem and dropped down the grid, and he's only starting in 13th place. But his teammate, Mika Häkkinen, is in 8th position, further up the grid. The usual last-minute checks. It's very hot here, very hot and humid. And the Tyrrell Yamaha of Yukio Katayama, the Japanese driver, is at last showing the form that we expected this season from this Harvey Postlethwaite design car. And Steve Ryder is actually with one of the Tyrrell drivers, Mark Blundell. Steve?
Yes, Mark Blundell on row 6, and you must be really encouraged by the progress that the team is seeming to make.
Oh yeah, I've had a bit of bad luck personally, but the team are doing a fantastic job. Tyrrell Yamaha's coming up the grid, as you can see. Today's a bit difficult for us with an engine change in between warm-up and the race, and there's a few problems even now, so it's a bit tense here at the minute.
What sort of disadvantage does that put you at, do you think? Just a little lack of composure about things at the moment?
Well, obviously you like to enter the race with a degree of confidence. Although I'm still confident, you've got a little niggle that something may go wrong because it's not completely 100% at the moment.
Tell us about the particular demands of this Imola circuit.
Well, it's a very physical circuit, full stop. You've got a lot of demands on the car in terms of braking. I mean, we're braking from 200 miles an hour down into Tosa Corner, so brake wear is critical. Tyre choice is going to be also important here. It's 26, 27 degrees. So there's quite a few things you've got to take into consideration.
Qualified pretty well. Have a good race.
Thanks a lot.
Mark Blundell starting 12th on the grid. He was 9th fastest in the warm-up this morning, so that's heartening. This car is 2 places ahead of Blundell. It's the second Sauber Mercedes of Austrian Karl Wendlinger, and he went very well in the warm-up, 4th fastest. They had problems setting up the car, getting the geometry right and all the other technical points, but they've succeeded. And Karl Wendlinger could well be a dark horse in this San Marino Grand Prix. Next behind him, another much improved car and a real surprise in terms of drivers, because Gianni Morbidelli there, who is putting on his flame-proof balaclava helmet, was out of Grand Prix racing all last year. He was a Ferrari test driver in 1992 and actually drove in the Australian Grand Prix where he finished 6th. But his footwork car is very much improved this year with its Ford engine. And now Steve Ryder is with another of our British drivers, Martin Brundle.
Yes, Martin Brundle with his McLaren on row 7. A few frustrations for you. What particular problems?
Yeah, it's been a difficult weekend. It's a new engine to Formula One, of course, and we expected some problems. Doesn't make it any easier to accept when it happens, but I hope today it's going to be like Murray, it never stops.
What are the particular handling problems that you seem to have? Because I know you were mightily encouraged by the way you went in Japan.
I think the Japanese circuit suited us better at this stage of the season. There's a lot of development going on. I think you have to look for us mid-season.
Tactics for the race then, and ambitions for the race are what?
Flat out. Absolutely flat out. I finished 3rd last year, 4th the year before. It's got to be 2nd, hasn't it?
That suggests it's a circuit that suits you.
No, I'm just going flat out. We'll see what happens.
Plans within the team for fuel stops, tyre stops?
2 stops, and obviously equidistant.
Hope the plan works right the way through to the finish.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, while we just move away from Mark Blundell's Tyrrell Yamaha, you heard Martin Brundle there mention 2 stops, and this, by the way, is his car. There is Martin, and some adjustments being made to his Peugeot engine. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the Benetton team, who are famed for doing something unusual in the race, making only 1 fuel stop. It was very significant that they were much slower than we expected in the warm-up period this morning, because Michael Schumacher 2nd on the grid. There's Martin Brundle. Martin looking as relaxed as ever, ex-Jaguar sports car driver, and an enormous amount of experience in Formula One. But now Martin Brundle waiting to get in the car, and so this is the Minardi of Pierluigi Martini. He's starting 14th on the grid. But I was talking about Michael Schumacher and saying that he was much slower in the warm-up than we expected, only 11th. And JJ Leto, his teammate, who's back into Grand Prix racing, and Jos Verstappen, who has substituted for him in the first 2 races, is back in his role as test driver. And Leto has gone extremely well in practice, but both of them were slower in the warm-up, and it could well have been because they were experimenting with fuller tanks than if they were going to have a 2-stop strategy. Tyres and fuel, as ever, are going to be an important factor in this race.
Yes, indeed, Murray. Teams used to come here to Imola with great fears about fuel consumption. Those fears have now largely gone away with the introduction once again of refuelling. This is one of many introductions and innovations for this new season. So we got Jonathan Palmer to take a closer look at refuelling and everything that surrounds it. Refuelling, one of the big new features of this 1994 season.
One of the most spectacular changes for 1994 is, of course, the return of refuelling, having been banned for the last 10 years. A Formula One car does just 4 miles per gallon, so to complete a 200-mile Grand Prix, it needs 50 gallons or 220 litres of fuel. Now that's a lot of weight, 150 kilos in fact, and last year a car with a full tank of fuel would have been 3 seconds a lap slower at the start of the race, the difference between a car at the front of the grid and one in the middle. Starting with much less fuel now means the cars are faster on the track and can take advantage of the pit stops they used to make just for new tyres to add fuel too. And here's where teamwork really counts, as over 20 well-rehearsed mechanics pounce on the car. The total time lost by making a pit stop is typically around 20 seconds, so teams must decide how many stops the extra speed can justify. 2 seems to be the most common. Of course, they make it look easy. But to optimise safety, elaborate aircraft-based technology is used. The fuel is stored in here, and it takes 2 mechanics to lift this huge pipe and place it to the side of the car. On the other hand, 70 litres are forced in just 6 seconds, whereas when we fill up at the garage, we seem to be there forever.
Well, all the teams have now worked out their refuelling plans. 2 stops, as we heard from Martin Brundle and McLaren. That's the McLaren plan. Great air of expectancy down here on the grid with some 12 minutes to go to that green light. It's substantially cooler than it was maybe an hour ago, and that may prove even more ideal for this afternoon's San Marino Grand Prix. So settle back and enjoy it. Jonathan Palmer is now alongside Murray Walker.
25 cars on the grid instead of the usual 26. 28 cars came here. Of course, the unfortunate Roland Ratzenberger is not starting, and Rubens Barrichello, the Brazilian driver in the Jordan team, had a massive accident on Friday, and I'm glad to tell you he's perfectly all right. I was talking to him yesterday. He's a non-starter, as is Paul Belmondo in the second of the 2 Pacific cars. His teammate Bertrand Gachot is starting at the back of the grid, and just in front of him, a very, very brave, courageous David Brabham in the second Simtek, having gone out in the warm-up this morning, is starting the San Marino Grand Prix, 25th and last on the grid. So the prospects for this race are truly exciting. Brazil is behind us. The Pacific Grand Prix in Japan is behind us. This race, over 61 laps of this 3.132 mile circuit. It's hot, it's humid, it's a very, very demanding race. It's a very low downforce race. That means to say that the cars have got small wings on them in order to maximise their straight line speed. And if you've got small wings, that means to say that there is not as much push down on the wheels. The grip isn't as good. They had narrow tyres last year. Those tyres are still being used this year. But last year they had active suspension, which helped the ride of the car and the grip of the car. This year, as one of the changed regulations, they have not got it. Last year they had traction control, which was a device which prevented the rear wheels from spinning. This year they don't have it, and the result is that the cars are more difficult to control.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Murray. And one of the other big differences that we have here for the third race of the season is that the Imola circuit is the first really fast circuit the 1994 World Championship has come to, with a top speed approaching 205 miles an hour on the way down to Tosa. The average speed is 130 miles per hour, and as we've heard from Schumacher and Senna, that means that Imola is a power circuit. Now, of course, the wings are set in a very low level. There is relatively little downforce. The trade-off is very much in terms of straight line speed, and that means that the cars are harder to drive around the corners. But also, being a contrast from the last circuit, it's taken drivers, I think, a couple of days to really familiarise themselves with the different levels of grip. It's a circuit, because of its very high top speed on the straight, indeed the cars are on full throttle for all of 20 seconds down that mile-long drag out of the start-finish chicane. Because of that, it is immensely hard on equipment, particularly on engines, on the gearbox and on the brakes. And as a result of that, this place historically has a pretty high attrition rate. Martin Brundle, we heard just earlier on, did indeed finish third last year, of course, and fourth the year before that. And it could well be that the bottom of the top 6 places are going to be covered by teams and cars that we're not familiar with seeing.
Michele Alboreto, the veteran Italian ex-Ferrari driver who's in a Minardi here, is starting from the pit lane for a reason I don't know, to be honest. He's obviously had some sort of a problem, and he will be getting away last of all, the rule being that you are not allowed to exit the pit lane very sensibly until the whole field has got away into the first corner. And Michele Alboreto was starting 15th on the grid, so he has in effect lost 10 places at the beginning of the race. As you look at Ayrton Senna now waiting to lead the other 24 competitors for the San Marino Grand Prix around the parade lap, the assembly lap of this 3.132 mile circuit. It's a responsible job because Senna has to go fast enough to keep everybody with him, but not so slowly that there is going to be overheating of the engines, and his aim is to get to the grid and disconnect the drive, as it were, as the last man, 25th in this case, assembles, so that Roland Brunscherainer, who will be starting this race, can then press the green button and get it away for 61 laps. And we've just heard, in fact, that Michele Alboreto will be starting the race in the spare Minardi, his regular car having developed a problem. That's going to come as a bit of a blow to Alboreto, because he's really had something of an Indian summer this year, being spurred on by Martini in a far better car, it has to be said, than he's driven for some time. Particularly as for this race, the Minardi cars are using the latest or the later version of the Ford HB engine, the Series 8, the engine that Benetton and McLaren used to such good effect towards the end of last year. Now, the start, as ever, is going to be vital here. There are 6 very, very good men in the first 3 rows. Ayrton Senna in pole position, Michael Schumacher next to him on the grid. Now, in Brazil, Michael Schumacher had a bad start and Senna had a good one. In the Pacific Grand Prix at the Aida circuit in Japan, it was the reverse. Michael Schumacher shot away from the start like a shell out of a gun, and Ayrton Senna got very dramatic wheel spin, as a result of which at the first corner he was hit by Mika Häkkinen. His race ended there. And behind those two, who are the rivals for the World Championship, notwithstanding the fact that Schumacher already has a 20-point lead over Ayrton Senna. And don't forget, by the way, that in the championship every point counts. There is no question of dropping points, as there used to be. Third in the grid, and the darling of the crowd today, of course, Gerhard Berger from Austria. There he is. We're looking at his car now, the V12 Ferrari, which is getting better and better. And if there's any way we'd expect it to go well, it is right here. Just behind him, on the same row of the grid, is Damon Hill, and then Leto and Nicola Larini in the second Ferrari. And don't underestimate him. He knows the circuit, he's the Ferrari test driver, and he is very good.
Because I think what's interesting here is that we've got Senna's Williams in pole, then a Benetton, then a Ferrari from Schumacher and Berger. So we've got the number 1 drivers from each of these teams in the first 3 places. We then quite simply go to the number 2 drivers, certainly in terms of their qualifying performance here. So it's Damon Hill in 4th place with the Williams, and then Leto's Benetton and Larini's Ferrari. So it's these 3 teams who are dominating the top 6.
2 new boys, as it were, in the first 3 rows of the grid. Nicola Larini, that I've talked about, a lot of Grand Prix experience in the past but not recently, and JJ Leto, also a lot of Grand Prix experience in the past, but he had an accident in testing over the winter, damaged his neck, he's very sensibly taken as much time as was needed really to get the strength back. I had a long talk with him yesterday. He is very, very happy about his physical condition. There's been no psychological problem, which you might have expected, because he's driving in a team now where he could actually expect to win a Grand Prix, and he hasn't been in that position in the past. So now, with just seconds to go, the grid is being cleared, and we will soon see the cars going round in less than 30 seconds time now for the first lap, which is not, of course, a racing lap, it's the parade lap. And let me tell you straight away that they accelerate away from the start here very rapidly up into 6th gear. Ayrton Senna in pole position on your right, and into the Tamburello.
Yes, the way they go there. Now, the bit that we're going to see first of all is what is really the main straight at Imola. They will come up, we see the grid peeling away through this 1 mile section. We shall see them flowing through a fast left-hander at Tamburello. There they go around out of the pit lane, pulling up through 190 miles an hour at this point, up to 205 miles an hour just here before they brake hard for Tosa. Back down to 2nd gear. You can see that they've gone around Tosa corner, now up the hill. Now the next corner, the corner Piratella, it's actually blind on the approach. We shall see that probably if there's some onboard camera footage. Over the brow, into this fast left. 4th gear, 120 miles an hour through the corner, and then blind on the exit, as you can see there. Down towards this 2nd gear chicane, 60 miles an hour, the Acqua Minerale chicane with all of that writing on it. 3rd gear, around the exit of Acqua Minerale, and then up to 190 miles an hour before the Variante Alta, the second of the 4 chicanes at the Imola circuit, on this fast circuit. And there's that Variante Alta, up again to probably close to 200 miles an hour as they descend down to Rivazza. The drivers trying to keep their engines fairly cool at this stage, but having to warm up the tyres and also warm up the brakes. And that's probably the most important thing, because getting brake temperature up on a circuit which is demanding on brakes is vitally important. It's a very tense time for a driver here. He knows that the start is absolutely crucial. It's very much the calm before the storm. He's peeling round through the Rivazza, up through the fast chicane, ready to get it absolutely right to that all-critical start.
Stop press news. Michael Schumacher deliberately induced wheel spin when he got away for this parade lap. He's laid an enormous amount of rubber at the very point that he will be lining up, and that rubber will provide extra grip for when he gets away. Senna will be looking for the young German to come alongside him. The first corner is the left-hander, the Tamburello, and there's a nice long drag up to the first really slow corner by Imola standards, the Tosa, at which point, at its slowest point, they decelerate from over 200 miles an hour to just about 50 miles an hour before blasting up to 190 again. So Senna is in position, in pole position on your right. On the left is the Benetton. Behind Senna is Gerhard Berger's Ferrari. Behind Schumacher is Damon Hill. That is Martin Brundle's McLaren, with a camera mounted on the rear wing. So, stand by for blast-off and for action from Imola. 61 laps of it. The green flag is showing. That means they're ready to go. Bruncher Rider can press the button. Now! And Senna boils away. Schumacher second, Berger third, Damon Hill, and that's a Lotus. They'll have to stop the race, I'm sure, because there's debris on the circuit. That is Pedro Lamy. It's Pedro Lamy, who, the young Portuguese driver, who was right at the back of the grid in 22nd place, and that is one of the Benettons, so that has to be JJ Leto. And Lamy is all right. We've seen a lot of very, very badly broken motor cars, sadly, at Imola over the last 2 days, and there is absolutely not a shadow of doubt in my mind as you look at car number 6 with its left wheel ripped off. JJ Leto, I presume he's all right because he's out of the cockpit and the race will be stopped. They'll have to remove the wreckage. That will take quite a long time. And I don't know how that happened because Lamy was right at the back of the grid and JJ Leto was in 5th position.
Well, I suspect, Murray, looking at the damage to those respective cars, it looks like Leto was very, very slow, if not indeed stalled at the start. The left rear is destroyed. Let's have a look now. It looks like Lami's hit the back of a slow Leto. There is Leto. There he is. He's stopped. He's stationary. And somebody's not going to hit him, and that's going to be Lamy. The Ligiers there going one each side. And there, just coming into our picture, is Lamy. Oh, that was very nearly an absolute rearward incident. And that's taken the complete right side off that Lotus car, and that really could have clearly had absolutely catastrophic circumstances. A wheel, looks like a wheel's gone into the crowd there, actually.
And very fortunately,
thank goodness he's all right.
Very fortunately, that area of the grandstand is empty, and everybody is blasting past me. You're looking at a replay. There is Lamy's shattered motor car, and at the end of the first lap, Ayrton Senna is leading Michael Schumacher by 0.3 of a second. Gerhard Berger is third. Damon Hill is in fourth position. Here come the leaders now. It is Senna, Schumacher, Berger, Hill. They're slowing down. The pace car is out. That's it, I think. The pace car is out, going up the hill. It's not right to call it the pace car, I apologise. It's a safety car. In circumstances like this car comes out with the flashing lights on the roof. Normally, he would have a problem to pick up the leader. The ruling is that he picks up the leader, and then all the others have to fall in line behind the leader with no passing allowed. We've had the safety car out very, very seldom. I can only remember it happening twice before, and never as early in a race as this. And I fear it's going to be out there for quite a long time, because to haul that Lotus, which is very badly battered indeed, and the Benetton of JJ Leto, which, as you saw, here's a replay. Now, look for Pedro Lamy cutting across from the left-hand side of your screen to the right, as out in the Sauber comes Wendlinger. You can see Leto underneath the green lights. He's stalled there. The Ligiers go past him. There's Lamy cutting across, and wham! Straight into the back of the Benetton goes the Lotus. Lamy completely unsighted.
Yes, that's just the kind of incident that Leto could do without, because apart from ruining his race, he of course is just recovering from a broken neck, and that kind of impact, which is going to be pretty hard, would undoubtedly have not done his neck any good at all. It's a great shame for Leto. He was really driving superbly in qualifying, his first time back into the seat with the Benetton after that difficult start to the season. Great shame. Maybe his unfamiliarity with the car there contributed towards the non-start that he clearly had, or maybe it was mechanical. We don't know at this stage.
We're looking back from the pace car now to Ayrton Senna, and my immediate reaction to this is this could well cause a lot of the technicians to be reconsidering their fuel strategy, because running at this slow speed, the cars, which are probably only got about 70 litres in the tank, will not be using nearly as much fuel. And while they're out behind the pace car, that means to say the miles per gallon will be considerably increased. There's Senna, Schumacher, Berger, Hill. Heinz-Harald Frentzen is in fifth position behind Damon Hill, and Frentzen was seventh on the grid, weaving to keep the tyre temperatures up. Behind Frentzen, who is fifth on the grid, there's the leading McLaren Peugeot of Mika Häkkinen. This is to some extent academic, because as soon as the pace car pulls off into the pit lane, and you'll know when it's going to do it, because you will see those flashing lights on the roof of the pace car go out, and he will then do a full lap with the lights out, and the lead driver, Senna, there he is, weaving the Williams Renault, will know that next time round it is go.
This is going to be equally important for these drivers, apart from keeping those tyres warm, as we can see them doing, because don't forget, these tyres need to work at about 80 or 90 degrees centigrade. That's their operating temperature. They'll be down to about 60 at the moment. To keep those brakes hot, those brakes made from carbon fibre need to work at about 500 degrees centigrade. And this kind of driving, unless the driver uses his left foot to put his left foot on the brake whilst accelerating with his right foot, that's the technique he'll need to employ to keep the heat in those brakes.
Now they're following the pace car now into the Variante Alta, which they approach at nearly 190 miles an hour, brake down to about 75. Senna, Schumacher, Berger. From there they drop downhill, tremendously fast section, building up to 190 miles an hour. to the Rivazza, which is a double left-hander, into it at about 60 miles an hour in second gear, then rapidly up into third, exit the second Rivazza. This is the first at about 100 miles an hour. Schumacher letting Senna build up a bit of a gap between the Benetton, which Schumacher is in, and the Williams Renault, which Ayrton Senna is in. Jonathan, pace cars not used when you were a Formula One driver, but from your experience, would you say that this was adding to the pressure?
I'm not sure that it's adding to the pressure. I think it actually probably helps, really, because stopping the race, which would have been the alternative a couple of years ago, really adds to the pressure for the drivers to go through the start, which is clearly one of the most dangerous parts of a whole race, is something which most drivers would rather avoid. And to go around, they can settle themselves down after all the energy and adrenaline and tension of that start. They can keep their cars in good trim. Everyone's engine is running. You know, there are some who say that Formula One Grand Prix should be started with rolling starts like IndyCar racing, but I think for most people the excitement of a standing start is essential to Grand Prix racing.
Well, I can tell you that they've got JJ Leto's Benetton off, and it's on the sand trap at the Traguardo, which is the left-right which leads into the start and finish straight. So now they're disposing of Pedro Lami's Lotus. And in the meantime, of course, although they're going very slowly behind the safety car, the race is on. These laps count. They are indeed on their fourth lap out of 61 now. And if you're interested, Ayrton Senna was leading Michael Schumacher by 1.8 seconds at the end of the third lap.
Yes, and what this may do is change or modify slightly the fuel stop strategy which these cars are going to adopt. Here we go. Here's another view of that, Leto's car. You can see virtually everybody got by that, looking for the two Ligiers parting it. And there was the Lotus of Lamy. He was unsighted by a car ahead. I don't know what it was, something towards the back of the field. And that was in his way. It was just very fortunate for him. Here's another look at that, as we see everybody weaving at the last minute. When cars are unsighted, just as happened there that the danger was, what it does show you is how good these suspensions on the extended wishbones are at absorbing energy. If that car had gone in square on, the results would have been very, very different indeed.
And just in case you are understandably worried, I'm happy to reassure you that both JJ Leto and Pedro Lamy, who indeed we saw get out of the car and walk away, are both perfectly okay. This is the scene from Ayrton Senna's mirror. So very first camera, you're seeing his yellow helmet in the mirror as he goes into the Rivazza. That's the first of them cleared. This is the second. And there are a lot of cars with a lot of cameras on in this race. Some of them on the rear wings, some of them on the fairing alongside the driver. And we've had some absolutely superb shots during practice, which I hope are replicated during the race. So, Gerhard Berger in the Scarlet Ferrari follows. Number 2, 3 times world champion, Ayrton Senna, who has won this race 3 times in 1988, subsequent to that 89 and 91, and that was the Minardi coming to a standstill.
Yes, that looked like Luigi Martini. I think we couldn't quite see the helmet clearly. It's either Alboreto or Martini. I suspect Martini. We don't know what his problem is, but no doubt it would have affected him either way and is not a consequence of this slow running. Of course, with regard to the strategy on pit stops, we believe that 2 stops is going to be the norm here, dividing the race into 3, and if that's the case, they'll be stopping on lap 20 of this 62-lap race. It's not impossible somebody could go for 3 stops, because the amount of time lost stopping here at Imola really is very little, because the pit lane is preceded by a tight chicane, and that means that the amount of time lost coming into the pits, and there we see that little bit of debris going across there, the amount of time lost going into the pits really is pretty small here.
And that was on the roof of the grandstand, incidentally. Shows you how high it went, as Lamy. Lotus have had a hard time in the last couple of seasons because Alessandro Zanardi, who was one of their drivers last year, had a very nasty crash at Spa. Now, the lights are out on the pace car, so it looks as though the San Marino Grand Prix is about to restart, and it will be on the 6th lap out of 61, so 1/10 distance already completed as we ride with Damon Hill looking at Gerhard Berger's Ferrari ahead as they exit the Acqua Minerale, climb up towards the Variante Alta. The Ferrari is preceded by Schumacher's Benetton, which is led by number 2, yellow helmet, blue and white, Williams Renault of Ayrton Senna. And Michele Alboreto it was who was touring, and he has gone into the pits, presumably with a repetition of whatever the problem was that made him start from the pit lane. So, coming through to complete lap 5, Senna, even if he hadn't seen those lights go out, and he certainly would have, there's nobody more astute in Grand Prix racing than him, will know from a radio message from the pits that that is the situation and that it's about to be go as far as he's concerned. Now, watch the Ferrari of Gerhard Berger, V12 engine, tremendous amount of power. He will have all the distance up to the Tosa, through the Tamburello and Villeneuve, the right-hander. And you hear the engine revs rise as Senna, followed by Schumacher. There is Berger. We're on lap 6 now, and the San Marino Grand Prix is go again, and as before, Schumacher is the chief rival to Ayrton Senna, who comes down to the Ravazza. There's Berger 3rd, Damon Hill is 4th, Frentzen in the Black Sauber is 5th, Mika Häkkinen 6th, Larini 7th, and Carl Wendlinger in the 2nd Black Sauber is in 8th position. Climbing up now, I'm sorry, it wasn't the Ravazza, they're climbing up now towards the Variante Alta as they go through the Acqua Minerale, dropping down to approach it at about 150 miles an hour. And there's a gap after the 2nd Sauber of Wendlinger. Ukio Katayama in the Tyrrell is in 9th place. Martin Brundle is in 10th, so he has gained places because Martin Brundle started in 13th position on the grid.
What's really interesting here is that Schumacher is very much keeping up with Senna. Now, from the morning warm-up times, he was 2 seconds slower than Senna, and that raised speculation as to whether he was actually going to make just one stop and therefore race with a much heavier fuel load. If he was going to do that, that would slow him down far more than his performance here looks, and it looks that perhaps that was a Benetton smokescreen. I'm not quite sure why they were so far off in the warm-up, but he is really not losing much to Senna at all. I would say basically he's right with him.
Well, we are right with Michael Schumacher now, and Senna! My goodness! I just saw him plunge off to the right, and Senna has joined Pedro Lamy and JJ Leto in a shattered motor car. You can see the debris on the right. What on earth happened there? I don't know. Whether it was a sudden loss of downforce for some reason, but Senna is still in the car. It means to say, of course, that Schumacher has gone into the lead, but the important thing is now, how is Ayrton Senna, with the marshals already waving the yellow flags? No passing.
Yes, this looks very severe indeed, I must say. It looks like this corner that Senna was going around is absolutely flat out. It's 185 miles an hour. We really should be seeing some medical attention coming quickly here to the Williams with Senna. His head is he's very still in that car. The car has clearly gone straight on. This is a little bit like the accident that beset. He really needs help in that car. There is nobody coming to him at the moment. Yes, his head's moved. I think I just saw his head move a little bit then. The race has been stopped. The red flag is out. This looks a little bit like a problem with the car, as beset Berger at this very point 4 years ago in his Ferrari.
And it's where Nelson Piquet went off in the Williams some years ago in similar circumstances, and thank heavens he was all right. I must say I have concern at the fact that A, Senna is sitting in the car still, not moving, and B, surprisingly, there is not a lot of action. And here it is. Now look, he's going into the left-hander tremendously fast, and he runs wide and goes straight off. Doesn't even attempt to take the corner. And, well, I say that's about 190 miles an hour at that point, the exit from the Tamburello. They're still building up speed, but it was not very far short of 200 miles an hour. You can see the debris pouring off the car as Gerhard Berger comes through in the Ferrari.
Yes, there was
and already now the medical assistance is there. And so I'm glad to be able to tell you that medical assistance is now with Ayrton Senna, and they're taking off his helmet to get him out of the Williams Renault. At a San Marino Grand Prix meeting which has been dogged with the most appalling circumstances. First of all, Rubens Barrichello goes off on Friday at about 150 miles an hour and was extremely lucky that he wasn't very badly hurt. Then we had the even worse, dreadful accident for Roland Ratzenberger yesterday. And now this on the 7th lap of the race.
Yes, it's really very difficult indeed to know what happened there. The little bit of footage that we saw as Senna left the track, he just appeared to go straight on, appeared not to make the corner. This is a corner which normally should be flat out at 185 miles an hour without the car being on the limit of grip.
Michael Schumacher has stopped and got out of his car, helmet off, grim-faced. And all is quiet at the Imola circuit. The crowd has been stunned into silence. Senna, an enormously popular man here, 3 times a winner here in the past, and a very likely winner seemingly when this race began.
This is always a very difficult time, of course, for the other drivers in the field. I can remember back when Gerhard Berger had an...
Senna is out of the car. Senna is now surrounded with medical people who are putting in a drip, and I have little doubt that the Brazilian will soon be stretchered away from here. Yes, the stretcher is in position behind him now. The course has been cordoned off with ambulances, and all down the pit lane there are stunned, silent mechanics, team managers, drivers, reflecting on the circumstances of a very unhappy 3 days. Well, you can see the pit lane situation for yourself now. Meantime, I can tell you that it is all controlled activity around Senna. The medical facilities at Imola are absolutely superb. There is no circuit in the world that has better facilities, and some are not as good, but there is a resuscitation centre here, there is an operating theatre here, there's a helicopter standing by. There are a large number of doctors. Professor Sid Watkins, who is the governing body of motorsports official doctor, is on the scene at any unhappy occurrences like this, and there is nobody better qualified than him to provide whatever attention is needed, and he has the most magnificent backup. It's one of his responsibilities when he comes to the circuit days before the race to check on all the medical facilities at the circuit, the ambulances, the major hospitals in nearby cities which will be used if a casualty has to be helicoptered away, and that procedure will of course have been applied here at Imola. And there is as you will have gathered, I can see things that you can't, and I can tell you that there is no change in the situation. The Williams is still by the side of the car, but far more important than that is the fact that Senna is still beside the Williams, and the medical team is working in a carefully controlled but intense manner. Everything is ready to take him away as soon as they are happy. And the helicopter is actually on the course now with its top rotor spinning, so you don't need very much imagination to see, with it being about 100 feet away from Senna, that he's going to be transferred to the helicopter, and he will be taken to the nearest major hospital, which is at Bologna, and Bologna is about half an hour by car, considerably less than that by air, of course.
Yes, there's absolutely no doubt at the moment that Senna is getting the best possible attention. As you say, Murray, the operation is extremely slick, and I'm sure that it won't be long before he's being helicoptered off to the Bologna hospital. Meanwhile, of course, people back in the pit lane are wondering what's happening. Indeed, we're all wondering what's happening. And it's particularly difficult for the other drivers. It's going to be difficult for Damon Hill, of course, in the other Williams and the whole Williams team to wonder exactly what happened and what's going to happen for the future. We assume that the race should restart.
So there you are. There is the scene with there is the helicopter, which is, as I said, about 100 feet away from Ayrton Senna, who is to the left of the picture. As you look at it, you see the man running away to go to Senna. As you look again at the pit lane, one feels absolutely helpless in circumstances like this, because there really is so very little that we can say that is of constructive interest to you. You want to know, and we want to know, how Senna is. All I can tell you again is that he's still there, and that any medical assistance which is required will be given very rapidly indeed. This will be of major concern to the circuit and to motorsport in general, because, well, you've seen the situation. Steve Ryder is down in the pit lane. He may have some more news for us. Steve.
Not a great deal more news, I'm afraid, Murray, but certainly in terms of the atmosphere down in the pit lane, well, the team's appetite for this race and this race meeting is really starting to ebb away. It has been a rather ill-fated 3 days. I, unfortunately, was in the Williams garage when Ayrton Senna had his accident. It wasn't a nice place to be, and there is still a very, very somber atmosphere in there. The first thing that happened, very correctly, was that they switched off the television monitors feeding the Italian television pictures. They had no desire to see the aftermath of the accident there. They were slightly more encouraged when it was clear that Ayrton was in a position to be removed from the car. And it's now the practicalities. There are members of Ayrton's family within the garage, and arrangements are being made for them to be taken away from the circuit and taken to the hospital and to follow events from there. But the mood, as you can expect down here, Murray, is one of not great enthusiasm for the race to come, if indeed there is to be a race to come.
Very understandably, and indeed one wonders if the race is restarted whether Damon Hill, as Senna's teammate, will be a part of it. But I can't imagine what that car is doing. It's Eric Comas in the Larousse Ford, who just burst out of the pit lane, and he's at the exit to the Tamburello, which is where the crash happened. It's inexplicable to me that he was allowed out of the pit lane, and it's almost as inexplicable that he was trying to leave it.
Well, indeed, from the commentary box we could hear him accelerating hard, and one wonders why on earth he was let out of the pit lane, which is controlled by traffic lights. It's got a red light, it's got a green light to go, and apart from that, as you would imagine, there is a whole gaggle of marshals and officials around the exit of the pit lane, and one would have assumed that would have been well and truly closed.
There is Comas, and at the bottom of your picture you can see that, well, I can tell you that the stricken Williams is still there, there's no change, and inevitably one has to admit that there will be a lot of speculation about Formula One and the fact that there have been these three major accidents. You saw Pedro Lamy there. There have been these three major accidents in as many days. Barrichello on Friday, Ratzenberger with fatal consequences yesterday, Ayrton Senna, who's still unconscious today. And I have to say, as a personal opinion, that I do not believe that the cars are any more dangerous now than they were when they had the things that have been banned for this year, that is to say active suspension and traction control.
No, I think that's absolutely right, Murray. The changes have been implemented this year to make the cars harder to drive, but these accidents that we've seen, be it the Barrichello accident, the Ratzenberger, the Lamy one that we've just seen at the start, and this one, I don't believe that there is any evidence, certainly not in any of them, apart from potentially the Barrichello incident, that the cars being difficult to drive has been any contributory factor whatsoever. I think that it is clearly, motor racing is always going to be dangerous. The cars are going extremely fast. They always have gone extremely fast, really. I mean, even 5 years ago with turbo engines, the cars would have been doing similar speeds at this point on the circuit. And really, without knowing exactly what the cause of these specific accidents would have been, as with any motor accident, as with any aircraft accident, it's very dangerous to speculate as to, or certainly make any generalizations about the sport or the cars or the regulations.
What one can say, of course, is that in order to maximise the speed at this circuit, where the drivers are on full throttle for about as much as 60% of the lap, they obviously want to have the minimum wing and therefore downforce. And some of the teams might have, and I'm not saying they did do this, but it's pure speculation, they might have just decided to run with marginally less downforce than they needed. But I certainly wouldn't have thought that would happen to Williams, who are enormously experienced and anyway have the tremendously powerful Renault engine, which would enable them to use a bit more downforce.
No, the critical thing is not so much the level of downforce, it's the balance between the car, of the front to rear. And even with light downforce, these cars have something like 1,300 kilos at this speed, at 185 miles an hour. And that's, as far as the drivers feel, is enough to have them well and truly pinned to the road. It's when you have a lot of downforce at one end of the car but not the other when a car can be impossible to control. But again, we have no idea just exactly, clearly what has happened in this situation.
Well, there is a tremendous amount of activity around Senna with the medical personnel at the present moment. Great deal of dashing backwards and forwards up to his recumbent position, and the helicopter is still waiting. That's a very good sign, because there is obviously optimism that Senna will be able to be airlifted to Bologna Hospital. Yes, he's being carried away. Ayrton Senna is being stretchered away as I talk to you. Still unconscious, but 6 people are carrying the special stretcher holding the Brazilian. Said what Professor Watkins is walking along behind them. Somebody is carrying a drip, and Senna is, as I speak to you, being put into the helicopter.
Yes, it might seem quite a long time since the accident happened, or certainly since he was benefiting from medical attention, to getting him in the helicopter and away. But this is absolutely right, in so much that the priority has to be to stabilise and understand the condition of Senna at this time. And once that's done, once the right procedures have been instigated and the condition is stabilised, then it's the time to move him away. So the delay that we've seen in getting into the helicopter is not a delay at all. It is just the right way of doing it.
Well, there it is, for the second time in 2 days, the unwelcome sight of a helicopter. And Senna is in it now. The rotor is building up speed. They still have the back door open.
Yes, if there is a hazard of this Imola circuit, it is a fast circuit, as we've said, but if there is a hazard, it's the fact that this main straight is not actually straight at all. It's a series of 2 curves, this very fast Tamburello left-hander that we're looking back at now, followed by the less tight, but still very much a corner, Villeneuve right-hander afterwards. And of course this means that if anything does happen to a car at very high speed, which clearly is normally in a straight line, the car is likely to move off and go to one side and go into the wall or Armco or whatever lines the circuit.
That was Mika Häkkinen walking along the pit lane, and now the clear is being given to the helicopter to take off and get to Bologna Hospital. Just a few minutes. Just a few minutes travel. That is the very good news, that from the excellent medical attention and facilities at Imola, Ayrton Senna is now on his way to the very, very best that medical science can provide at Bologna. A happy sight in one way, but a far more unhappy sight in the other. And this is Schumacher's car, and you see Ayrton Senna veering off to the right, quite on the wrong line. And that's the result. Now, I cannot and will not hypothesize, because I don't know what happened, and it would be quite wrong to do so. We can just hope, and all I can say is that he did not appear, from what I saw of that picture, to attempt to take the corner. This is Damon Hill's car, you see. There's Schumacher disappearing in the distance, and Damon would have seen that great plume of dust as he went by in his car. And Damon's car, as I talk to you, is actually being pushed onto the grid for the second restart. The first time, of course, it was from behind the safety car, a rolling restart on the 6th lap out of 61. This is a replay again from Schumacher's Benetton.
Yes, if you watch it, it's just about now that the car appears to us to turn slightly right, but don't forget this is going around a left-hand corner, and merely going straight on would tend to have that effect. We're clearly very much offline. The angle of impact there, certainly not head-on, but a glancing flow at this speed clearly involves the dissipation of that phenomenal energy we saw.
Now, if you look at this, they're rocking backwards and forwards. You'll see a flash of sparks there underneath Senna's car. We're actually rolling back now while they reposition the tape. But there appeared to me to be a flash of sparks underneath the Williams, which might just have meant that it had a very low ride height in order to minimise the wind resistance, and that he struck a bump, but who knows.
Yes, one of the consequences this year of active suspension not being allowed is that the cars have to run very low with their conventional springing, and that means that we're back to a familiar sight of years gone by of the cars with fuel in, touching the ground, touching the underneath with the skid blocks. But that in itself is not abnormal for these kind of cars, and indeed it was the sort of sight that we saw all the time a few years ago. And from the point that we saw those sparks emanate from underneath Senna's car, as the camera came, as Schumacher came closer, we could see that there was a shininess to the surface there, which means that was pretty normal for cars to actually ground at that spot. So I wouldn't think that was necessarily tremendously significant in what happened here.
Senna's car is being removed from the circuit now. There you can see the vehicle that is doing so in the bottom left corner of your screen. The grid is being reformed. Damon Hill is on it. I've just seen Christian Fittipaldi walking to his car as you see the transporter removing the shattered remains of the Williams Renault. And it means to say that Schumacher will be in pole position. Gerhard Berger will be second behind him on the grid. Damon Hill third. Heinz-Harald Frentzen fourth. Mika Häkkinen, who was in sixth position when the race stopped, moves up a place, as does Nicola Larini to sixth position on the reformed grid, followed by Karl Wendlinger, Ukio Katayama, Martin Brundle, Gianni Morbidelli, Mark Blundell, Martini, and the rest of them. Johnny Herbert holding the Team Lotus umbrella. And Herbert was, again, of academic interest, but he was in 15th position when the race stopped. As you watch Senna's Williams being removed, or is it being sent back to its garage? No, it's being removed from the course. There's little point in taking it back to the garage. So again, a scene of activity on the grid at Imola, but people here will have increasingly less aptitude to watch the reformed race. There's bound to be concern.
Yes, now assuming that the race is indeed restarted, what will happen now is that the full race distance will be it'll actually going to be, we've just heard actually, it's going to be 53 laps for the balance of the race. And one would expect the first part that we saw to then be added on, the result of that to be added in aggregate to the second part.
Yes, the rule is that if the race ran for less than 2 laps, it's regarded as not having been started at all. If it runs for more than 2 laps, it's in 2 parts. And we have news from Steve Ryder.
Well, it's to confirm the news that Jonathan has just given. There's no more information coming from the FIA press office and the press centre at the circuit here. They're not going to give any information on Ayrton's condition until they know it's official, and indeed no information has yet come back from the accident site. But what can be confirmed is that in a maximum of 8 or 9 minutes from now, a rerun of the race, the second restart, will take place, and the race will be run over 53 laps. But as yet, no information concerning the condition of Ayrton Senna.
So 53 laps, the second part, and it will be added on to the time for the first part, but there's very little difference between the first and second men. Now, just as a matter of explanation, the grid for the second part is going to be the standard grid, arranged obviously in the order in which the cars finished the first part, as I said. And since Schumacher was the first driver to finish the first part, as you watch Gerhard Berger, who will therefore be starting second on the grid, and he will be followed by Damon Hill on the grid. So it's going to be Benetton Ford in front of the Ferrari of Gerhard Berger, in front of the Williams of Damon Hill, then the Sauber of Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Mika Häkkinen's McLaren, and Nicola Larini's Ferrari. Only 2 cars from the same constructor in the first 6, those 2 cars being those of Gerhard Berger, second on the grid, and Nicola Larini, 6th on the reformed grid. That's one of the footwork cars that's just gone out of picture.
Clearly, as a driver here in this situation, it's very, very difficult indeed. For many of them, this is going to be the most difficult time that they've faced in their careers motor racing. The last time that we had any kind of extremely serious incident in a race was 1982, and to be faced with the prospect of the race restarting and whether or not to compete and take part and start in what has just been underlined as is an exceptional, can be, I think that's the right word, really can be an exceptionally dangerous sport, is something which they're going to be facing and going through their minds. But I'm sure that by and large, I suspect, in fact, without exception, that the drivers will, with their tremendous courage, focus on the job in hand. They recognise, I'm sure, I suspect they will recognise that a degree of luck or lack of it is prevalent in anything in life, particularly in motor racing, and that it is, of course, no one could imagine that things could go as badly as this, but that at some point, motor racing, and so they're going to have to decide, what to do and to get back in, and I'm sure that they'll be professional enough generally to do that.
Yes, these men are competitors when all's said and done. The race is going to be restarted, and somebody once said when the lights go to green, the adrenaline starts to flow, and they will be back in competition again. And all their concentration, every waking split second, will be applied to the job of making the car go as fast as possible and closing the gap between you and the man in front, or if you're in front, endeavouring to maximise the gap between you and the man behind. The new 1994 Ferrari there, can't see which one it is, I think it's Gerhard Berger's. No, it's Nicola Larini, who, as I said earlier on, is going to be starting from the 6th position on the grid. I must tell you, I'm not exactly clear at the moment whether Schumacher will be lining up. Yes, I'm sure Schumacher will be lining up in his previous grid position. It's just that I would expect Senna's grid position in front of and slightly to the left of him to be vacant. And car 29 there is the Sauber of Austrian Karl Wendlinger. That is the Tyrrell Yamaha, British-built car at Ockham in Surrey with the Japanese Yamaha engine. Japanese driver Ukio Katayama starting 8th on the grid. Behind him, the next car you will see will be the red and white McLaren Peugeot of number 8, Martin Brundle, who demonstrated a very different kind of courage earlier this year because he had many lucrative offers to drive for teams, but he decided that he was going to stand fast and hope that the McLaren seat, which had been vacated at the end of last season when Senna moved to the Williams team, would be his. And his persistence and that special kind of courage paid off, and Martin Brundle got that seat. He's yet to score any points this year, of course, because he retired from a strong 3rd position in the Pacific Grand Prix, and he failed to finish in Brazil. Now that is one of the new liveried Footwork Ford cars. Behind Martin Brundle, it's the car of Gianni Morbidelli. He has driven for the Dallara teams before. He's driven for the Minardi team. As I told you earlier on, he drove for Ferrari in the Australian Grand Prix the year before last. He's won race for the Maranello team, and he finished an impressive 6th place. And that's the Minardi Ford of Pierluigi Martini. You see the little Italian there with the white helmet with the yellow top to it. He's starting 12th on the grid. And here is that is Christian Fittipaldi's Footwork, 2nd Footwork Ford car. Last year they used the Mugen engine, which is being used by Lotus this year. And incidentally, we can expect to see the new Lotus with a completely new Mugen Honda engine in the Spanish Grand Prix. Gerhard Berger starting 2nd on the grid, only Michael Schumacher in front of him. And he's talking to Bernie Ecclestone, actually, the man who is more responsible than anybody else for what happens in Formula One. And Gerhard Berger, of course, very much a senior citizen in Grand Prix racing now, because the 34-year-old Austrian is actually starting here today, well, has started here today in his 150th Grand Prix. Damon Hill puts on his helmet, the sole Williams Renault representative in the race now. Damon is equal 3rd in the World Championship, just 1 point behind Rubens Barrichello, who is not starting here today after his crash in practice on Friday. He's perfectly okay, of course. I was talking to him yesterday. Quite miraculous avoidance of a major problem, and he's actually gone home now to get some rest before the Monaco Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. Damon Hill is talking to Adrian Newey, who is with Patrick Head responsible for the design and development of the Williams Renault, which has been so successful. That's Mika Häkkinen's McLaren Peugeot, the young Finnish driver, ex-Lotus. Last year he was hoping that Senna wouldn't be driving for McLaren, so that he who had been signed would be able to drive. As it happens, Senna decided he would drive and went on to win 5 of last year's Grand Prix, whilst Mika Häkkinen acted as a very successful test driver until the Portuguese Grand Prix, where he finished in 3rd place. And now he, with Martin Brundle, is one of the 2 McLaren Peugeot drivers responsible with the French technicians in Paris for bringing on this new V10 engine. In the background, behind the McLaren, you see the Ferrari of Nicola Larini starting 6th on the grid. He's the reigning touring car champion of Germany, and incidentally in an Alfa Romeo, that is. And Nicola spends his time at the present moment in effect commuting between single-seater driving for Ferrari and touring car driving for Alfa Romeo, the latter with a great deal of success. So again, the course has been cleared. The track has had any debris that it had on it removed. With one part of the race completed, we will now be starting a second 53-lap race, the results of which will be added to the first short part, which ran over a full 5 laps because the accident happened on the 6th lap, and the result of the San Marino Grand Prix and the allocation of the resultant World Championship points will be decided on an aggregate of the 2 results. Eddie Jordan on the right, and he's talking to the Team Lotus boss, Peter Collins. Eddie Jordan has had a very tough season. Eddie Irvine, one of his drivers, was, that's Peter Wright, the Lotus chief technician and designer on the left. Eddie Jordan lost the services of Eddie Irvine after the multiple collision in the first race of the year, the Brazilian Grand Prix. Eddie Irvine is here, incidentally. And then Eddie had the Rubens Barrichello crash to contend with, and Andrea De Cesaris, who is substituting for Eddie Irvine, has had a pretty torrid time in the Jordan over practice. He's gone off several times because, to be fair to the Italian, he hasn't driven for 6 months and had never driven the Jordan before, and it takes a lot of settling down. That's Berger, the eyes of Gerhard Berger. And that is Nicola Larini in the Ferrari. There he is.
Yes, we just saw him back on the side of Nicola Larini's helmet, a strap that he's had on, just to try and help him withstand the G-forces. His head, with the helmet on, weighs quite a bit, and a strap like that, which is anchored from the side of the helmet onto the side of the cockpit coaming, can allow him to support his head.
Now, if you have just joined us to watch the San Marino Grand Prix and wonder what is happening, I'm sorry to have to tell you that we've had a massive accident here involving the race leader, Ayrton Senna, in his Williams Renault, who went off at the Tamburello, which is a tremendously fast left-hander, and his car was shattered, and Senna, after quite a long delay and a lot of medical attention, has been removed to Bologna Hospital by helicopter. We're waiting for the start to be resumed, for the race to be restarted. When it is, it will be over 53 laps. Originally, it was intended to be a 61-lap race. The race was stopped 30 seconds to go on the 6th lap, and the results will be decided on aggregate. So on the right, you see Schumacher in pole position.
So it's Schumacher in pole position there on the left-hand side of your screen now. They are about to go away for this final green flag, the wave lap. Away they go. They're pulling around for a final warm-up lap. This is not, of course, the start. This is to enable them to get the car fully up to working temperature, to get themselves up to working temperature to an extent as well, but perhaps most importantly, so that it's to ensure that this kind of situation can't happen out on the track. And that looked like Heinz-Harald Frentzen stopped in his Sauber car. Now, had that been the real start, that car could have been left on the grid, as indeed we saw with the Leto incident at the start of the first part of the race. But by keeping the cars moving, by having this final green flag lap, it means that all drivers, certainly at this stage, have got their engines running. That's one of the Sauber mechanics there, going up to see if he can do anything about that. But I suspect the car's going to be pulled back out of the way, and we'll have to start the race, if indeed it can, from the pit lane.
It was, indeed it is, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who was going to be starting from 4th on the grid, and will now have to be starting from the back of the grid if he can get away. Meantime, on the second parade lap, Michael Schumacher leads Gerhard Berger and Damon Hill up towards the Variante Alta, the right-left at the top of the hill. Followed now that Frentzen is at the back of the grid by Mika Häkkinen, who has therefore moved up to 4th position. And that is Nicola Larini, who is following Mika Häkkinen. So into the Variante Alta. Schumacher, this is the parade lap. Berger. Damon Hill.
Just see Schumacher then just looking in his mirrors, the drivers all looking in their mirrors, checking who's behind, and you'll also note when they come around to take up their position on the grid, they will all be single file for as long as possible before ultimately moving across and taking their start positions. This is so that they can keep on the racing line, which is where the track is at its cleanest, and they do not want to spend any more time than they have to driving along on a dirty part of the circuit. Actually, we can just see there, 4th there is Mika Häkkinen. He's able to start very quickly indeed. So he made a great start, perhaps a bit too quickly at Japan, and we may well see a good start from him here.
The 3rd start of the San Marino Grand Prix, the 2nd standing start, because the 2nd start was from a rolling start behind the safety car, with a new pole position man, Michael Schumacher, followed by Gerhard Berger, Damon Hill 3rd, Mika Häkkinen 4th, Nicola Larini 5th, Carl Wendlinger in 6th position, followed by Katayama 7th and Martin Brundle in 8th position. Over 53 laps. And wheel spin from Schumacher's car, which allows Gerhard Berger to go into the lead in the Ferrari. Damon Hill is 3rd, Mika Häkkinen is 4th, Nicola Larini in the 2nd Ferrari is in 5th place, and Schumacher is already swarming all over the gearbox of the Ferrari, looking for a way past. But Gerhard Berger has not led a Grand Prix for a very, very long time. Damon Hill attacking Michael Schumacher on the left, and Berger will not be at all anxious to give way. Indeed, he leads up to the Variante Alta. It's still Schumacher 2nd. Häkkinen has gone up into 3rd place. Larini is 4th. Where is Damon Hill? He's dropping back. Damon Hill is dropping back. So Berger leads. Both the Williams have struck trouble. Damon Hill is there. He is. We're with Damon Hill now. It looks to me as though he's already touring in, and it looks to me too as though both Williams are out of the race, and we're only on the 7th lap in all, the first lap of this restarted race. Häkkinen 3rd, Larini 4th. In 5th position, it is Carl Wendlinger in the Sauber, and I think Damon Hill touched Michael Schumacher's Benetton as he tried to go through and take him on the inside. So now the battle at the San Marino resumed at Grand Prix as they come through to complete the first lap with the Tifosi. Absolutely euphoric is Gerhard Berger leading Michael Schumacher.
Yes, that certainly looked
And they're getting a new nose ready for Damon Hill's Williams.
Yes, that certainly looked a clean start there. It was good to see. Great start from Berger. Schumacher really should be able to find a way past the Ferrari, but don't forget the Ferrari has a lot of horsepower, considerably more than Schumacher, and that's going to make Berger difficult for Schumacher to place. There is Hill into the pits.
Now let's see how long it takes to replace this nose assembly as Michael Schumacher continues to attack the Ferrari in front of him and endeavour to retake the lead that he held earlier on as they go into the Acqua Minerale. Now uphill towards the Variante Alta. Look at the crowded stand on the left. This is something that the Tifosi have not seen for a very long time in Italy. A Ferrari leading, and it's Berger. Now you can see the gap because Michael Schumacher and Berger are starting to pull away from the lower-powered McLaren Peugeot of Mika Häkkinen, who is in 3rd place.
Yes, and that's Damon Hill now, who's just left the pits with what looked to be a new nose fitted to his car. Now Schumacher has really got to try and get, we can see this is the telemetry in fact from the Benetton of Schumacher. The blue trace is the RPM of the engine, and beneath that the green one, the gas, is basically accelerator pedal, throttle pedal.
Now this is really interesting because I remind you that fuel strategy could well decide this race. I hypothesised earlier on that Michael Schumacher might only make one fuel stop, whereas it's quite possible that the Ferrari will make two. In fact, certain that the Ferrari will make two.
Yes, and that was a possible overtaking spot we saw for Schumacher. He tried to keep in the toe of that Ferrari, but he really couldn't get up along. He certainly couldn't get alongside it. As we said, the Ferrari has considerably more power than Schumacher's Benetton. The Ferrari V12 engine reputedly giving 815 horsepower, but I'm sure the exact figures are unknown to anybody but Ferrari. But it's going to be a difficult situation for now for Schumacher to try and find a way by, because of course it's on that main drag. The main drag out of the start-finish chicane up to Tosa is where most of the overtaking gets done, at least under braking for it. And to be in the right position to have a chance to go by, Schumacher needs to be certainly right up behind the Ferrari, literally within 3 or 4 yards, and preferably with an overlap starting to come by.
Ferrari have had all sorts of understeer problems with this new John Barnard designed car, but they've produced a new nose assembly, a new front wing. They've changed the aerodynamics on the rest of the bodywork, and a lot of that understeer has been eradicated, and you can see the result as again Gerhard Berger goes past the start and finish point, past the crowded grandstand in the lead, and he has got Michael Schumacher right behind him. Häkkinen is now nearly 9 seconds behind this battle for the lead. In the second Ferrari, Nicola Larini is in. There he is, you just saw him come round the left-hander as up to, and running very wide goes Schumacher.
No, Schumacher deliberately went wide there. He wanted to get a faster exit to that corner. He did so by coming in wide to try and get up alongside into the next one, Piratella. It didn't work. Frankly, it's a tall order. But what really Schumacher needs to do is to try and encourage Berger to come into that corner where that incident took place, tighter, so that Berger's exit speed is slower. Now then, if Schumacher can manage to dummy Berger into doing that, then that tactic of coming in wide to come out fast could pay dividends, and he could come up along the inside, the left-hand side, before Piratella.
The leaders are now 9.5 seconds in front of third place man Mika Häkkinen. Larini fourth, 2 seconds behind the McLaren. Wendlinger is fifth, Katayama is sixth, and there's news from Steve Ryder.
Yes, an update on Ayrton Senna's condition from the pit lane, albeit a rather non-committal one, as it's bound to be. He's received injury, undoubtedly a serious one. He's been taken to the intensive care unit of the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna, and any further news will come from there. So Ayrton Senna being treated for a serious head injury, and now the Williams team are going to try and turn their thoughts and concentrate on what's happening in this race.
Thank you, Steve. And we ride with Michael Schumacher chasing race leader Gerhard Berger in the Ferrari.
Now watch Schumacher's left thumb on that button just to his right of that left thumb. He should move it across there, hits the button. What he does by that is trigger an automatic down chain sequence right down to second gear, and that's what he needs for that corner.
Now I'm afraid the results and positions in this race are going to be a bit complicated to communicate to you now as you watch the footwork chased by the Minardi. But I'm going to give you results on aggregate as well as the second race that you're looking at, and I'll tell you that at the present moment Schumacher is still 1.4 seconds in the lead on the combined race so far, the first part and this second part. But if he can keep Gerhard Berger in sight, that lead will be maintained, provided the gap doesn't increase very much. But in this second leg, it's Berger in the Ferrari. It is Schumacher in second place. Mika Häkkinen is 10.7 seconds behind. Riding with Michael Schumacher round the Tamburello at 190 miles an hour. Speed still building to 200 miles an hour, up to just over that. And then it's down through the gears to second gear to a minimum speed of 55 miles an hour. Round the left-hander at the Tosa here, and again Michael runs wide, cuts across to the left, closing up a bit on Gerhard Berger's Ferrari. That's Häkkinen. There is Larini in fourth place, Wendlinger in fifth place, Katayama is sixth. That is Christian Fittipaldi, who is seventh. And behind Fittipaldi, his teammate Morbidelli is in 8th position, and Johnny Herbert is having a battle with Mark Blundell, followed by Martin Brundle. So it's a tremendously exciting all-action race behind the leaders, who are giving us a tremendously exciting all-action race of their own at the front. And here it is. Berger leads. Schumacher second. Look back. Schumacher leading on aggregate by 1.5 seconds. And this is the 11th lap in the total race of the two parts.
Yes, it's going to be difficult for Schumacher to get by. I really think that the Ferrari certainly does not handle as well as the Benetton. It has to run very stiff. You can see the Ferrari jiggle around. It looks nervous, it looks darty. That's because it's running a stiff suspension setup to try and keep the car at a constant attitude, a constant ride height off the road to try and help its aerodynamics. Again, it looks like Schumacher is not close enough here. Again, it's only on the straights when you can have a chance to come alongside and get by. He will probably try his wide line again here coming into Tosa. He's not close enough, I really don't think, to try the inside. Berger goes to the inside, blocks the inside. Schumacher goes wide. He's closing now, you see, momentarily. But again, I think that Ferrari horsepower is enough to power the Ferrari up the hill and keep ahead. And that's the problem that Schumacher's going to have, and it might just be that we'll have to wait until the first fuel stop before he can get by. Of course, Schumacher being hopeful that Berger will make a mistake.
And Mika Häkkinen has got exactly the same problem with Nicola Larini, who is right behind him. Mark Blundell attacking Herbert. Frentzen is coming up through the field in the second Sauber, and down to the left-hander at the Ravazza. That's David Brabham, who is racing on in the sole Simtek in this race as Schumacher continues to attack Berger. Now, Gerhard won't be happy to be leading this race in the circumstances that he's leading it, but if anybody can keep the Ferrari in front, it is the very, very determined and enormously experienced Austrian. He's got 8 Grand Prix victories behind him already for Ferrari and for McLaren, because this is the second time around for Gerhard Berger for the Maranello team.
Berger lapping in 1 minute 25.0, Schumacher 24.9, whereas Damon Hill, with a clear bit of road in front of him after that pit stop, has just set the fastest lap so far of a 1 minute 24.3. So Schumacher being held up a great deal. Now Schumacher he had a go at the outside line. Can he go for the inside? No, Berger is really making his Ferrari pretty wide. Now let's see how he does it this time. I don't think again that he can get enough of a run up at Berger here to be able to get by alongside that all-important Piratella. But it does look, however, that Berger is struggling increasingly to keep Schumacher behind, so it may well be only another 2 or 3 laps before the eventual ultimate result happens.
Well, if Michael Schumacher could just stay as close to Gerhard Berger as he is at the moment, and he's going through. Michael Schumacher darts through at the Acqua Minerale and takes the lead in the second part of the race, and he already had it on aggregate, of course, and now we can expect to see him pull away, because it looks to me as though the Ferrari handling is slightly suspect compared with the Benetton. Indeed, you can see the gap that's already built up. Now, here it is, Berger behind Michael Schumacher as they come up to the Variante Alta chicane.
What must have happened there was that Berger must have either missed a gear. Pitting.
Already, Michael Schumacher into the pits. Now, why is this happening? We certainly didn't expect this to happen as early as this. Is this a routine stop? Yes, it is, because in goes the fuel and changing the tyres. About 9 seconds is a very good pit stop for fuel and tyres. 10.1 seconds. And Michael Schumacher boils out of the pit lane on new tyres with refuelling completed. And Gerhard Berger is certainly leading now, not just the second leg, but also the whole race on aggregate. Now, this is Schumacher's. We're riding with Schumacher now. There's the Ferrari ahead.
Yes, and this is one corner before we know Schumacher got by the Ferrari, so he's coming up, accelerating to 170 miles an hour, down to second gear. Oh, what a shame. I thought we might just see how he actually managed to get by Berger. But very interesting that Schumacher has stopped. Now, he's stopped on actually lap 14 there from the original distance, and it could well be that had Schumacher been intent upon a 3-stop strategy, that would be stopping after lap 15. So it could well be that he was really fixed into that routine, a 3-stop strategy, whereas Berger will probably go on till lap 20.
Well, Gerhard Berger is on his 14th lap in the full double race, as it were, and he's now leading Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Peugeot. We're riding with Martin Brundle, actually, and he's in 11th place. But Mika Häkkinen is 11 seconds behind Gerhard Berger, and Michael Schumacher is in 3rd position, the same time almost behind Mika Häkkinen, just over 11 seconds, with Nicola Larini in 4th place, Wendlinger in 5th. Here's Berger leading the second leg. very comfortably, but remember, he's leading very comfortably as a result of the man who had retaken the lead, Michael Schumacher, having gone in and refueled and taken on new tyres. So Berger will be at 10/10 now, endeavouring to ease away with a clear track in front of him, so that when he comes in and refuels and changes tyres, as of course he will, because the Ferrari V12 is much thirstier than the Ford V8 in Michael Schumacher's car, Berger would hope to get back with Schumacher or even in front of him after his pit stop.
Yes, but Berger still being out means that Schumacher did start this race with less fuel in than Berger, and of course that's one of the reasons why he would have been able to go faster. He should have been able to go a little bit faster anyway, although Berger and the Ferrari were within 0.3 of a second during qualifying. The situation we're looking at here, with Berger well out in front, of course is not entirely representative of the pure pace of the Ferrari, although it undoubtedly is going. And Berger very shortly afterwards going in. Now it still looks like they could both be on 3-stop routines. This is fascinating. We did not expect them to make 3 stops. It looks like that's the case now. The pit stop should be pretty quick, maybe 6 or 7 seconds.
Yeah, and remember that Schumacher's time was about 10 seconds, and that's a sparkling stop. Berger has gained about 3 seconds on the pit stop. Now let's go. There's Schumacher in the background, and Berger is still in front of him as he got out of the pits, and we're watching now Mika Häkkinen against Nicola Larini in the second Ferrari, followed by Wendlinger in the Sauber.
Yes, now that stop was quick. It was about 6 or 7 seconds, and that it was that fast because the Ferrari mechanics didn't put a great deal of fuel in that car, and that almost certainly means he will be back into fuel by lap 30. This is definitely a 3-stop routine from Berger, but we don't know yet about Schumacher, but it's most likely to, I have to say.
And while we're looking at the screen, we're also watching the computer to give us the corrected positions as you watch the Häkkinen in the McLaren, Larini in the second Ferrari, Wendlinger in the lead Sauber, because his teammate Heinz-Harald Frentzen is 4 places behind him, battling now for second place on aggregate. Here's Mika. Tremendously determined, forceful driver. He's coming through to complete the lap because he's coming into the Triguardo, which is the left and the right. Now accelerating, and Häkkinen runs very wide, right on to the hard shoulder, as it were, as he comes down the finish straight, and he's pulling away from Larini now. Indeed, on aggregate now, you are watching the race leader, because having taken everything into account, Schumacher's stop and Berger's stop, it is Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Peugeot, and in only their 3rd race, the new combination of McLaren and Peugeot with the French V10 engine are leading a Grand Prix.
It may well be a temporary boost, but nevertheless I'm sure that's going to be much appreciated by McLaren and by Peugeot. Häkkinen really doing a pretty good job fending off Larini there, who's got a lot more horsepower undoubtedly. The McLaren team, having had some problems with the fact that the Peugeot engine has at this stage of its development tended to run rather hot. They've been madly trying to get more cooling from the car, putting on radiator exit ducts, and we have to hope that the car can stay reliable throughout, because Häkkinen this time certainly looks on a front-running pace.
Now, Michael Schumacher has got ahead of him. It looks, it's Christian Fittipaldi in the Footwork Ford, who has not, of course, stopped to take on new tyres and to refuel as Schumacher has. And Schumacher on aggregate now is in second position, although he's still got to get past Fittipaldi in this race.
This really will be quite a headache for Schumacher. They have the strategy of diving into the pits for this fuel so that the car can continue to lap fast, and that advantage can be completely undermined by coming out of the pits behind slower traffic like Fittipaldi there, and if he can't make advantage of that lightweight very quickly, and he really wants to have a go up the inside now, yes, he's going to come by Fittipaldi, then he's got the by Fittipaldi there, and looks like that's Berger.
That's Berger. He's out of the race. Gerhard Berger retires from the San Marino Grand Prix. Well, he's led it, but in circumstances that he wouldn't like. Meantime, I can tell you that the Williams people are preparing for Damon Hill to come in. He's way down the field in 17th place after that nose cone replacement. And Michael Schumacher is slicing his way through. Remember that Gerhard Berger, who had taken the lead from the young German, has now retired from the San Marino Grand Prix. Michael Schumacher, I think, will soon be back in front on aggregate. He's about 1.3 seconds behind Mika Hakkinen on this, the 18th lap in total, as Schumacher comes up to catch Ukio Katayama in the Tyrrell Yamaha, followed by Fittipaldi, who Schumacher has passed. And Schumacher is followed, Fittipaldi is followed by Wendlinger. And out of the race goes Olivier Beretta, the ex-Formula 3000 French driver who is in the Larousse Ford at this time. And there's going to be a lot of retirement still to come, I'm sure.
Schumacher needs to get by Katayama. Katayama's Tyrrell really going very well these days. Again, it's for sure holding Schumacher up. He won't, I don't think, matter in the ultimate result, but at this stage it will be a frustration to him. Meanwhile, we've got Hakkinen and Larini, who I suspect will be on a two-stop routine. There are yellow flags there for Beretta. Nothing to worry about there. There's Hakkinen. He and Larini behind, just gone into the picture, will be on two-stop routines, which will probably mean pitting this lap, next lap, certainly within the next three.
Yes, and as you watch Michael Schumacher, who's made his pit stop, and we're riding with him now, close up on Yukio Katayama in the Tyrrell Yamaha, I have to tell you again that this race is running late as Damon Hill leaves the pit, having refueled, running very late indeed because it was stopped after a massive accident involving the then race leader Ayrton Senna in his Williams Renault, as a result of which Senna had to be helicoptered to hospital. We understand he has a head injury and we are waiting for further news. But that is Mika Hakkinen, who had led the race on aggregate. And that means that Schumacher is back now in charge of the San Marino Grand Prix on his 20th lap. Larini, that's him, is in second position in the Ferrari. Katayama, who's just being passed by Schumacher now, who leads the race, is in third position.
Interesting how it took a full lap for Schumacher to find a way past the Tyrrell. The Tyrrell using the Yamaha engine, which was, if not much maligned, it certainly wasn't regarded with particularly high esteem last year. Oil flag out there, the red and the yellow oil flag, probably from Beretta's incident there. Schumacher pulling away quite quickly from the Tyrrell, but it just goes to show you how much somebody can get held up, and it's all very well preparing these strategies of 2 stops, 3 stops, but it's very difficult to make allowances for traffic, for being held up and using the advantage that one really needs to get out of it.
Well, we know that the Benetton is reliable. We know that the new Ford engine is good. We know that Michael Schumacher is an extremely mature driver, notwithstanding his comparatively youthful age of 25, and he's now in charge on aggregate, leading Nicola Larini in the Ferrari, who has yet to come in for his pit stop by 1.7 seconds. So when Larini comes in, as surely he will, there he is, it will extend the gap between him and Schumacher, who is closing up on the Ferrari now. And if you find this strange, that Schumacher should be in the lead when there's a Ferrari in front of him, I remind you that it's a 2-part race, having been stopped on the 6th lap of the first part when Michael Schumacher was chasing Ayrton Senna, who crashed. And there's the German in the Benetton Ford, going through, changing his line at the very last moment to pass Eric Bernard, the Frenchman in the Ligier Renault. And incidentally, for those of you who are interested in the politics of racing, as you watch Larini with the gap between himself and race leader Michael Schumacher diminishing rapidly, as far as we know, the negotiations between Benetton's Flavio Briatore and the French Ligier team for Briatore to buy it outright are still proceeding. The assumption being that the Benetton team want Renault engines, which are being used by Ligier as well as Renault, and about the only way they're going to get them is to buy the team.
Well, it wouldn't be a bad thing for Ligier if that happened, I don't think, because they couldn't really be doing an awful lot worse. They really are squandering the tremendous potential advantage that those Renault engines should have. They are to the same specification as, certainly more or less, as those that Williams enjoy. They are 3 seconds a lap slower, and I'm quite sure that they could be put to better effect.
Now, down to the Rivat and on and up now towards the Variante Alta, out of, they go.
Schumacher now closing on the Ferrari of Larini, although I would think that Larini must be on the verge of stopping. If that wasn't the case, then Schumacher may find himself losing a little more time, as he did with Berger, being slowed by the Ferrari, its horsepower again making up for its lack of grip.
Lap 22 in the combined race. Schumacher, that we're riding with now, is chasing the second place man, because Schumacher had a lead in the first race. Larini, I would expect to be coming into the pits very shortly to refuel and take on new tyres in the Ferrari. He's 4 seconds behind Schumacher on aggregate. And Fittipaldi, Christian Fittipaldi, is in a podium position. He's in third place at the present moment in the footwork Ford, 20 seconds behind Michael Schumacher and 1 second ahead of Mika Häkkinen's McLaren Peugeot. Fifth is the Sauber of Frentzen. Sixth is the second Sauber of Karl Wendlinger. Katayama is down to 8th. Morbidelli in the second footwork Ford is in 9th position, followed by Pierluigi Martini and Mark Blundell.
We said this is going to be a race of attrition, or certainly historically the Imola Grand Prix have been a race of attrition, and it looks like we're going to see some relatively unusual teams and drivers in the top 6 at the end.
Now watch the gap diminish between the Ferrari of Nicola Larini, second place, and race leader Michael Schumacher behind him in the blue and green Benetton. Schumacher calmly and methodically reeling in Larini. Excellent drive by the Italian.
You can see, looking at the telemetry there from the RPM, that the blue trace of RPM only really goes down a lot below 15,000, and in fact round about 7,500 revs when he goes down to second gear. Providing Schumacher is third, fourth, fifth, sixth gear, he's keeping that engine right at the top of its power band. Larini going around for another lap, not stopping yet. This is a little surprising.
Now this is where I expect Schumacher to get past the Ferrari, although the Ferrari has got a power advantage which is going to help it on this part of the course. This is the quickest and longest part of the course. They're on full throttle for about 20 seconds from the time they leave the right-handed Traguardo until they come up to the left-handed Tosa, down to about 50. And through on the inside goes Michael Schumacher, race leader on aggregate. And so you're now looking at the true positions. Schumacher leading, Larini second, 6 seconds behind, but he's got to come in. And that is Frentzen's Sauber in the pits. And Frentzen was in 8th position on aggregate. Schumacher now easing away from Nicola Larini. And although it's still early days in this 53-lap second leg of the restarted San Marino Grand Prix, it is already looking as though Michael Schumacher has got to just pace himself home to his third consecutive victory. When he won in Japan the Pacific Grand Prix, that's Mika Häkkinen, who is third on aggregate. The McLaren Peugeot is going well. When Schumacher won in Japan, it was the first time he had won 2 races in succession. It looks as though here in Italy today he may make a new record for himself by winning 3 in succession. But as I said, there's a long way to go.
Damon Hill up to 12th place now after that stop to change his nose. And of course he came in for tyres and fuel. Hill being pretty happy actually with his setup yesterday when I spoke to him, which was not the case on Friday. The Williams has been really pretty tricky to drive on the limit. Difficult to set up perhaps for the first 2 races. And for this race the team have developed a new nose, a new front wing assembly to make the car less sensitive to set up, to make it easier to drive, providing more confidence. And it certainly seems from qualifying and indeed what we're seeing from Damon Hill, because I think he's still set the fastest lap of the race, it's working here.
David Brabham is still running in the Simtek. He's just been passed by Nicola Larini. And on this, the 25th lap, Schumacher is leading the car you're looking at, Nicola Larini's Ferrari, by 8.5 seconds, ahead of Häkkinen third, Wendlinger fourth, Katayama fifth, and Morbidelli is in 6th place. British drivers, Mark Blundell is 9th in the Tyrrell Yamaha, Martin Brundle is 10th in the McLaren Peugeot, Damon Hill has come up from 17th to 12th as Martin Brundle goes through, and he's having a battle with Pierluigi Martini's Minardi. And actually Brundle is... I'm sorry, I know this is confusing for you, but whilst Brundle is just behind Martini on the road, he's actually ahead of him on aggregate, and that is Bertrand Gachot overcooking things at the Acqua Minerale right in the Pacific car. He was the only one to start because his teammate Paul Belmondo did not qualify again. We're watching Berger pulling away. Now there is Bertrand Gachot. It looked to me as though he had... I just saw the car jerk and thought maybe he'd still got the engine running and installed it, but it was the marshals pushing him. So there's another retirement. Out goes Bertrand Gachot, and the Pacific team have yet to finish a Grand Prix. They've had 6 tries, 2 drivers in Brazil, 2 drivers in Japan, 5 tries, 1 driver at San Marino. And Michael Schumacher pacing himself away at the start. That's Häkkinen. Now the gap on aggregate between Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Peugeot in 3rd place and Nicola Larini in the Ferrari, who, as far as I know, has not come in. And that is Martini touching wheels with Mika Häkkinen, trying to go, and that was very, very lucky indeed that he managed to keep it running at the Tosa.
Lucky for Martini, but also lucky for Brundle, it has to be said, because he came very close indeed to taking out Brundle with him, and that would have been definitely not something that Martin or the McLaren team would have appreciated. Martini there coming up the inside, having a look, and I think just got a bit sideways under the braking, but fortunately both managed to carry on. Now here we are, here's the replay. Martini on the outside, braking hard, up the inside, just touched. Brundle leaving a little bit of the door open. Bit of a racing accident there, really, I think, but Martini really coming up the inside without enough room to do the job from the room that Brundle had given him there.
And he's certainly not an inexperienced driver. He's driven in nearly 100 Grand Prix, has Pierluigi Martini. And Martin Brundle's had his share of problems since he joined the McLaren Peugeot team, because he was innocently involved in Brazil in the multiple collision between himself, Bernard, Verstappen and Eddie Irvine.
As we watch Larini, it would seem that the Ferrari have taken the decision to go for just a one-stop routine. We're on lap 26 of this race now, of the complete aggregate race, and one assumes that he's going to be coming in around about lap 30. These stops do have to be pre-planned in terms of when they're going to be positioned in the race distance, because the exact amount of fuel has to be calculated and worked out beforehand.
Well, there you saw Martini's car being attended. He's obviously come in for a check after making contact with Martin Brundle's McLaren Peugeot. And if Larini is, of course, going through on a one-stop strategy, which would surprise me with the V12 very thirsty Ferrari, and Michael Schumacher that we're looking at in the lead now is going to stop twice, that will close things up when Schumacher comes in. But you can get into and out of the pit lane pretty quickly here at Imola, and it wouldn't have as dramatic effect as it might do at some of the circuits where you have to slow right down and take a long route into the pit lane. But it could mean that Larini is right up with Schumacher after the second Benetton Ford fueling stop, if there's going to be one. And I'm sure there is, because if you remember, Schumacher had a very short stop of about 7 seconds, so they couldn't have put enough fuel in then to last him the rest of the race.
Indeed, further to that, Schumacher is lapping substantially faster than anybody else in the field, 24.8 at the moment. That's at least 1.5 seconds from anybody else. Damon Hill, there we have Blundell up the inside there of Frentzen. And back to
So there is Schumacher. He is behind Andrea De Cesaris in the sole Jordan Hart car. De Cesaris in 15th place on aggregate, and De Cesaris is chasing Olivier Panis, the French Formula 3000 European champion of 1993, and neither of them, they're both very involved with their own battle, and Schumacher, in a masterly move, takes both of them. De Cesaris follows through, gains a place from Olivier Panis, who was probably a bit rattled by suddenly seeing Schumacher on his left the door open. Andrea De Cesaris, an enormously experienced Grand Prix driver, because I know it's a cliche, but he is the man who's driven in more Grand Prix than anybody without winning one. This is his 198th race, and he took advantage of that experience to get past Panis's Ligier Renault. And this is a battle between Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Peugeot, and behind him Carl Wendlinger, who had a lot of trouble in the Sauber Mercedes V10 powered car, getting his car set up for this race. He was well down the grid order on Friday's qualifying period. He got the car going well in the second qualifying period on Saturday. He was fourth fastest in the warm-up today, and that's beginning to show. And there's no doubt about the fact that Carl Wendlinger, the Austrian, has got more power in his V10 Mercedes engine than Mika Häkkinen has in his V10 Peugeot engine. And I would expect Carl Wendlinger to get past Häkkinen and move up to third position on aggregate. It is that close. And into the pits now, the Ferrari of Nicola Larini. So that is lap 30 that he stopped on. Gets away well. He was 23 seconds ahead of Häkkinen on aggregate. And out of the race goes David Brabham. Well, he was a brave young man to start this race. At one point it was thought that he would just do one lap and then come into the pits, but he's obviously decided courageously to go on and retires on lap 30, which will have given heart to the Simtech team and enable them to get some more mileage onto this brand new car, as Michael Schumacher carries on his potentially victorious way with a clear circuit in front of him, a clear circuit behind him. Nicola Larini is coming now. That's Frentzen. That's Heinz-Harald Frentzen in the Sauber. Was in 8th position, and he's gone down to 10th place now as a result of that pit stop. And into the pits again comes Schumacher.
We expected that. This is confirmation of the 3-stop routine for Benetton. He should be in if it's a good stop for perhaps 7 seconds in total. We shall have to see. They're changing tyres, as we would expect. Fuel going in, comes off. We haven't got the stopwatch there, unfortunately, but a good clean stop. Really, Schumacher has got the race, providing he stays reliable, pretty much under control. Meanwhile, what we would like to see is progress on Damon Hill, because Damon is now up to 10th place. He's charging hard. He's taken 2.5 seconds a lap off Pierluigi Martini in his Minardi, and that's soon going to put him right into a fairly major area of battle that's going on. So we could yet see a very good result from Damon Hill.
And the relative positions and gap between Larini, who is second that you're looking at, and Michael Schumacher, who is leading that you were just looking at, has remained much the same. They've both now had... Schumacher's had his second stop, Larini's had his first stop, where on lap 31 Schumacher came in with about a 29-second lead. So you subtract about 9 seconds for the time he's stationary. You have to take off a bit more time for the slowing down period from when he turned off the course into the pit lane, and the accelerating period from when he left his garage up to getting up to racing speed again. But the overall effect is that Michael Schumacher is still about 20 seconds, rather more than 20 seconds, ahead of Nicola Larini. They're on their 31st total lap from both parts, and Schumacher has just lapped Olivier Panis in the blue Ligier with the white wing. He is in 14th position. And the race order on aggregate, I emphasise, on lap 31, and this is a 53-lap second part, and you watch Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who has rejoined the race, attacking Johnny Herbert and passing the Lotus. The race order is Michael Schumacher leads potentially on his way to a third consecutive Grand Prix victory. This man, Nicola Larini, by 21.5 seconds. Mika Häkkinen is 5 seconds behind the Ferrari in third place on aggregate. Carl Wendlinger is only 4 seconds on aggregate behind Häkkinen. Katayama, the Japanese driver in the Tyrrell, who has finished in the points already this year, 5th in Brazil, is 5th here. And in 6th position, Gianni Morbidelli, followed by his teammate, Christian Fittipaldi, both in footwork Ford cars, 6th and 7th. Martin Brundle is in 8th position in the second McLaren Peugeot, and everybody up to Brundle has been lapped by Michael Schumacher, including Damon Hill, who is a lap behind the leader now, but I remind you, gaining all the time after a pit stop, and he's going very, very quickly indeed. Indeed, Damon Hill's last lap was done in 1 minute 24.79 seconds, compared with Schumacher's 1 minute 28.4. And here is Larini. It's a race of potential drama at the end of it, although sadly we've had more than enough of that already. As Larini comes through to complete another lap, the Ferrari sounding strong and certainly powerful and looking good. Gerhard Berger already out of the race, having led it, and that was the first time a Ferrari had been in the lead since Jean Alesi led a race. And I haven't mentioned Alesi yet. Nicola Larini, that we're looking at now, is driving in the second Ferrari because Jean Alesi had a very nasty accident in testing at Mugello, damaged his neck, and has sensibly decided to stay out of racing, as did JJ Leto, until his neck is really good and strong again, as a result of which Larini took his place in Japan, has taken his place here, although we hope that Jean Alesi, the tremendously popular French Sicilian charger, will be back in the second Ferrari at Monaco in 2 weeks' time.
Larini's certainly doing a very good job indeed, but on past form one would expect Alesi to have been quicker, certainly, or as quick as Berger. But since the last Grand Prix in Japan, there has been, although it's settled down now, a bit of controversy about the Ferrari team, because it transpired that following the first practice session, that's not the official qualifying session, but the practice session on the Saturday at Aida for the Pacific Grand Prix, the Ferrari came to the FIA and volunteered the fact that they had developed a form of power modulation device in which it is not strictly a traction control device, but nevertheless a mechanism in which, and that looks Schumacher being squeezed there.
Now, Andrea De Cesaris, who's just been passed by Michael Schumacher, is battling for 12th position on aggregate, for 11th position on aggregate with Johnny Herbert. And De Cesaris has got ahead of the Lotus. And as I said earlier on, they were both occupied with their battle and not too exercised about letting Schumacher through, but he's got past.
Indeed, yes, back with Ferrari. But Ferrari did try in the first practice session on the Saturday at Japan a system in which the power output of the engine was reduced in the lower gears as a method of trying to prevent the wheels ever starting to spin. They went to the FIA or FISA, who deemed that system was not permitted and therefore it was not run further, but it certainly was a rather controversial thing to do, although it seems to be well under control now.
News of the two Williams drivers. We have no more specific news about Ayrton Senna, who was removed to Bologna Hospital by helicopter after an enormous crash on the 6th lap, after which the race was restarted. Damon Hill, who had to come in and have a nose cone replaced after touching Häkkinen at the third start, because the first start was the normal one, the second start was from behind the pace car, the third start was from a standing start, and you're watching the continuation of that now. Damon Hill hit Häkkinen and had to come in for a new nose cone, and as a result of all the tyre changes and refuelling, there is certainly no question of Damon Hill not being on the same lap as the leaders now, although he's 1 minute and 12 seconds behind on a lap that's taking about 1 minute 26 seconds, which is Schumacher's time. Schumacher is leading on lap 34. by 24 seconds from Nicola Larini, and as a matter of interest, the lap record here is held by Riccardo Patrese, 1992, in the Williams-Renault, 1 minute 26.1, when the car had the initial active suspension and other goodies that Williams were using. And so Schumacher has just broken the lap record officially. He's just gone round in 1 minute 26.062, which is about a tenth of a second faster than the previous lap record.
That previous lap record being set 2 years ago, because last year the weather conditions were variable, it rained for much of the race, and that's why it was not broken last year. But what's interesting too is that despite this year's regulations removing active suspension, removing traction control, and not reducing the downforce a great deal, the cars this year are in fact faster, and that the pole position from Senna was a 1:21.5. That was half a second faster this year, despite those benefits, than the cars had in 1993, or rather than pole position in 1993.
Schumacher has just smashed the lap record again, 1 minute 24.4 compared with the previous lap record 1:26.1. But the second fastest man on the track is Heinz-Harald Frentzen in the retired and refueled Sauber Mercedes. He's gone round in 1 minute 25.4. That's a second slower than the man you're watching, Michael Schumacher. And there's a tremendous battle between Nicola Larini for second place with Mika Häkkinen. Larini is 5 seconds on aggregate in the Ferrari ahead of the McLaren Peugeot of Mika Häkkinen. So for the second race in succession, the new partnership of McLaren and Peugeot are in the top three positions. It was Martin Brundle in the Pacific Grand Prix in Japan. It's Mika Häkkinen in the San Marino Grand Prix in Italy. And the race order on lap 36 on aggregate: Michael Schumacher in the Benetton Ford, there he is, leads Nicola Larini's Ferrari by 27.3 seconds. Third is Mika Häkkinen, 32 seconds behind the leader. Fourth is Wendlinger, 39 seconds behind the leader. Fifth is Katayama in the Tyrrell Yamaha, an excellent drive, 45 seconds behind the race leader that you're looking at. Fittipaldi and Morbidelli in the Footwork Fords are 6th and 7th. Martin Brundle is 8th. Damon Hill is 9th, a long way behind Brundle. Into the pits comes Carl Wendlinger from 4th position, and this will give Fittipaldi the opportunity to move up into 4th position, and that's a good stop, just on 9 seconds. But it looks to me as though Wendlinger has gone it was very, very close for 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th. We're with Häkkinen now, and you may soon start to see the Ferrari come into sight. No, you won't, because Häkkinen at the present moment is lapping about half a second slower than Nicola Larini's Ferrari in second place. And Katayama is now 4th, Fittipaldi is now 5th, Morbidelli is now 6th, Wendlinger, as a result of that tyre stop, has gone down to 7th, and he's only 6 seconds ahead of Martin Brundle, who is 9 seconds ahead of Damon Hill in 9th position, with Frentzen to make up the top 10 in the second Sauber, 14 seconds behind Damon Hill. It's getting to be close behind race leader Michael Schumacher, who, if he just keeps going in the reliable Benetton, looks as though he has the San Marino Grand Prix in his grasp.
It's a very good result indeed, a very good performance from Katayama.
Häkkinen to the pits now. Häkkinen in 3rd position, and I expect to see this would be really interesting and significant. Yukio Katayama moving up into 4th position. Yeah.
Very good stop from Häkkinen there. That is the final McLaren pit stop, certainly the final McLaren scheduled pit stop there, his second of 2. And Katayama indeed going very well indeed, saying that there's been a lot of development from Tyrrell, that they are now involved this year with Jean-Claude Migeot, the aerodynamicist who worked indeed with me when I was at Tyrrell in 1989, having set up an independent development research company, Fondametal, and indeed the aerodynamic development of the Tyrrell is being carried out and has been carried out to such good effect by Jean-Claude Migeot's Fondametal operation in conjunction with Harvey Postlethwaite and the engineers in Italy.
So as you watch the Ligier, we're on now lap 39 with Michael Schumacher leading the race, and there is news from Steve Ryder in the pit lane.
Yes, it's news from the hospital, and it's done absolutely nothing to lift the spirits here in the pit lane. The first indications from the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna that Ayrton Senna is in an extremely grave condition. The report is of a grave head injury. Ayrton Senna is currently in a coma. We understand from the hospital that for a while his heart stopped. He was put on a respirator. His heartbeat has now been restored, but his condition remains extremely grave. Senna, who went off in that high-speed crash at Tamburello, the second attempt to start this race. And the official word from the hospital is that his injury is extremely grave and Ayrton Senna is in a coma. Also got details of an incident that you may have seen at the start of the original race, the first race, when a wheel from J.J. Lehto's car appeared to go into the crowd at the main grandstand. And reports confirmed that a policeman and 8 spectators were injured in that incident. None of them seriously. Policeman and 8 spectators injured when the wheel of J.J. Lehto's went into the crowd. But the news of Ayrton Senna is what is dominating the thoughts down here in the pit lane. Ayrton Senna's condition extremely grave.
Awful news from Steve Ryder as Pierluigi Martini runs away from his Minardi, which he is now retired from the race and will be extracted from the sand trap by the crane. And with about 19 laps to go now, the San Marino Grand Prix comes to a close, which I'm sorry to say everybody will be very glad to see. It has been a most unhappy meeting in so many ways in the practice and now in the race. And the race is led by Michael Schumacher as you watch the McLaren Peugeot of Martin Brundle coming into the pit lane. And the race order on lap 40 with 19 laps to go as Martin Brundle comes into the pits is Schumacher leading Nicola Larini by 35 seconds. Larini is some 19 seconds of Yukio Katayama, which in different circumstances we would have regarded as a quite magnificent achievement. And you can see Martin Brundle has stalled his engine in the McLaren Peugeot as he tried to get away. I think he may have misunderstood the signal from the lollipop man in the front. He's gesturing them to get his engine going. And we're on lap 41 now. Schumacher 35 seconds ahead of Larini. That is the German in the Benetton Ford. Katayama third, Fittipaldi fourth, Morbidelli fifth, and Häkkinen in 6th position.
The McLaren there using a different sort of clutch control, of course. Now that the McLaren does not feature a clutch pedal on the floor, the clutch is operated by the driver's fingers with a lever behind the steering wheel, behind both sides of the wheel. Clearly the control of that is not as familiar, certainly, as using a pedal. Schumacher there, using the standard version of the Ford Zetec engine. He used the development engine yesterday. Ford continuing to try to push forward the barriers of the performance and increase its performance towards that of the Renault. And indeed, I chatted to him to see how the performance of the Zetec compared to the HB engine he ran last year, and he said there was a difference. It revs 1,000 RPM more, which must put it over 14,000 revs, which is a great deal for a V8 engine. It's a very efficient engine like its predecessor, although clearly some way yet off the horsepower figures of the Ferrari and the Renault.
If Michael Schumacher wins this race, and we're watching the Ligier there pursued by one of the footwork cars, that of Gianni Morbidelli, who is in 7th place. As I say it, Morbidelli rolls to a standstill. He is out of the race, and that will mean to say that Frentzen moves up into a 7th position on aggregate. But as I was saying, if Michael Schumacher wins this race, it will give him limited satisfaction to have won it in the very unhappy circumstances that obtain here at Imola at the present moment. It would give him another 10 points in the World Championship, and Rubens Barrichello, who is second in the championship, is not racing. Damon Hill, who is equal third with Berger, who is retired, only had 6 points, and Hill is not in the points at the present moment. Jean Alesi, who's in 5th position in the championship, isn't here today. In fact, the only man in the top 6 in the championship, who is Christian Fittipaldi on a mere 3 points compared with Michael Schumacher's 30 if he wins this race, and Fittipaldi is in 4th place now. So if this race runs to a conclusion in the order that it is now, as far as the leader is concerned, Michael Schumacher would have increased his substantial World Championship lead to a massive World Championship lead.
Schumacher comes up to lap Frentzen, so he's lapped up to 8th place now. We saw earlier the Ferrari of Larini. Larini really going extremely well. He's lapping as quickly as anybody, bar Schumacher. And bear in mind too that he's still got a pretty heavy fuel tank. We know that his strategy, the Ferrari strategy, was only to stop once. There's Schumacher going by Frentzen, just to stop once. So that means that he's carrying, must be 130, or was carrying immediately after his stop, 130 litres of fuel. So a very good performance from Larini.
We expect this race to run to 58 laps on aggregate, 5 from the first leg. It stopped on the 6th leg, and on the 6th lap, and 53 laps from this second leg. And we're on lap 43 at the moment. So there are 15 laps left, with Michael Schumacher a very comfortable and commanding 40 seconds ahead of the Ferrari of Nicola Larini that you are looking at as he makes his way up to the Variante Alta. Ukio Katayama is in 4th position because now Mika Häkkinen has moved up to 3rd place. Indeed, the aggregate positions are changing by the second on the 43rd out of 58 laps. It's Schumacher, Larini, Häkkinen. Wendlinger is now only 2 seconds behind the McLaren Peugeot of Mika Häkkinen, and only 3 seconds ahead of Yukio Katayama, who has been displaced from 3rd. In fact, there is the Japanese driver in the white Tyrrell, and you can see behind him he has Mika Häkkinen, who is 3rd on aggregate. We're riding with the Finnish driver now, young 25-year-old Mika Häkkinen from Helsinki, although he lives in Monaco at the present moment, and he's closing up on the much improved Yukio Katayama, who got himself a pretty unenviable reputation last year of spinning out of more races than he finished in. But this year, in the notably advanced and improved new Harvey Postlethwaite designed Tyrrell Yamaha, the Japanese driver is showing that he's a very mature, and for his age, capable driver.
Now with 44 laps of the race now gone, Schumacher is the only driver of those in the first 4 that has got to make a further pit stop. Larini, we know, has made his last one, as has Häkkinen. Häkkinen's made his second, and Wendlinger just going for a one-stop routine. So Schumacher should be in the pits any minute now.
Here he is, as you say, Jonathan. Schumacher comes into the pits for another fuel stop, and out very quickly indeed. And since he had a 43-second lead over Nicola Larini, and he's only got 14 laps left to go, that will be Michael Schumacher's last planned stop, and he would hope not to be making any unplanned stops, as you watch Katayama coming up to the Variante Alta, pursued by Häkkinen, and they are closing up on Johnny Herbert, who is a lap behind them and about to be lapped again in 12th position. And the race order on lap 45 is Schumacher leading Larini by 33 seconds. Häkkinen, that you're looking at in the red and white McLaren Peugeot, is 3rd, and behind Häkkinen you can see Wendlinger, and that's how close the battle is for 3rd position in this race and on aggregate. Wendlinger in the Sauber is in 3rd position. That's the black car with the yellow mirrors, and we're with Häkkinen now. In front of him it's still Katayama, who's staying ahead on the track, although he's 2 places behind him on aggregate. Race order: Schumacher, Larini 2nd, Häkkinen 3rd, and we're with him. Wendlinger is 4th, just behind us. In 5th position is Katayama, just in front of the McLaren because of the aggregate situation. And in 6th place is Christian Fittipaldi, and up to 7th has come Damon Hill.
Because the person that Häkkinen's got to worry about is Wendlinger behind. He's some 32 seconds behind Larini, but Wendlinger is just 1.9 seconds behind, and Häkkinen, currently in 3rd place, will have to work carefully, particularly with the traffic that is around at the moment, to make sure that Wendlinger doesn't slip by.
And the McLaren Peugeot has yet to finish a Grand Prix because both Häkkinen and Brundle retired in Brazil. Brundle through the collision ultimately, although his flywheel had come off just before that, which would have taken him out of the race in any case, of course. And they both retired from the Pacific Grand Prix. So if Häkkinen brings his car home, it will not only be the first time that the McLaren Peugeot has finished a race, it will be the first time it has finished in the top 3.
Now, Damon Hill is now the fastest car on the circuit. He's lapping in 1 minute 25.6. He's just 13 seconds behind Christian Fittipaldi in 6th place, so it looks like a points finish is going to be on for Damon Hill.
Yeah, Katayama is the man that's interesting me at the moment. He may be in 5th position on aggregate, but he's in front of Häkkinen, who is 3rd. He's ahead of Wendlinger, who is in 4th position, and he's staying ahead. Now, Häkkinen may not have the horsepower in the Peugeot, but it's an indication that the V10 Yamaha engine, which has been worked on a great deal by the Yamaha technicians and, of course, by John Judd's engine developments company in Rugby, and it's producing results because the Japanese driver doesn't have anything like the experience that Mika Häkkinen has got.
Now, Mika Häkkinen is going to need to get by. That's Mark Blundell in the Tyrrell just ahead. He's about to lap Blundell. Again, he's keeping a good distance behind. He's just pulled out a second, in fact, on Carl Wendlinger behind. Meanwhile, teammate to Blundell, Katayama, really maturing very well this year. A driver who we were far more familiar with seeing off the circuit, normally having spun harmlessly off last year, but really driving very maturely indeed in 1994 with undoubtedly a much better car.
12 laps to go. We have no further information on Senna's condition, and we'll obviously let you know as soon as we get any ourselves. But on the 47th lap out of 58, Schumacher has now got the race totally under his control. He's 32 seconds ahead of Nicola Larini. It looks as though Ferrari are going to have a 2nd place finish for the 2nd race in succession, which will lift their hearts. But you have to temper that by saying, as you watch Damon Hill going very fast indeed, that Larini is a full 30 seconds behind Benetton's Michael Schumacher.
Damon just 6 seconds behind Fittipaldi now. Fittipaldi in the footwork in 6th place, who himself is 4 seconds behind Katayama. Now, another benefit that Tyrrell have actually got here for the first time is this automatic downshift button. Before, they had to, or the drivers had to operate the flipper behind the steering wheel to change the gears both up and down. Now, of course, the teams still need to keep changing gears up using the flipper, but changing down, they are permitted to use a button if that triggers an automatic sequence of downshifts. These semi-automatic gearboxes do help the engines. They help the engines because they prevent the driver from mis-shifting and missing a gear. Used to be the classic way of buzzing an engine, which means over-revving an engine. And these engines only have to be over-revved by perhaps 500 revs and they can brake.
Well, Damon Hill is lapping 3 seconds faster than, he's now lapping 4 seconds faster than Katayama. And Damon Hill is just out of the points. And the gap between them is enough. Oh, what's that wheel off? It's a Ferrari, and it's not. It's a Minardi, and it looks to me as though there's been an accident in the pit lane now. It's a Ferrari mechanic that's on the ground. I'm guessing because I didn't see it happen, but it's clear that a wheel came off the Minardi, which may well have happened as a result of a collision in the pit lane. But Now this is the last thing that the San Marino Grand Prix needs, and there's chaos in the pit lane. There's a danger of cars coming in at high speed, and well, that is a Minardi. I can't see whether it's Alboretto's Minardi. And there's Gerhard Berger in his overalls.
Yes, it might be in fact that the right rear wheel clearly has come off the car, possibly because it was not put on properly with these very rapid pit stops. There's a big responsibility on the mechanics and the team and the person controlling the pit stop to make sure that the wheels are all on and done up tightly before the car accelerates hard out of the pit lane.
I'm guessing, but it wouldn't surprise me at all in view of the way this race has gone and the chaos in the pit lane and the fact that there's a stretcher there to see the race stopped. It's run the mandatory distance of 3/4 in order to enable full World Championship points to be awarded, although that is a bit irrelevant now too. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the red flags come out to stop one of the most unhappy races it's been my ill fortune to watch in my entire Grand Prix viewing career. And on lap 50 now in this 50-lap race, as you see the medical attendant come up to the stricken Ferrari mechanic, Michael Schumacher is 35 seconds ahead of Ferrari's Larini, who is about 40 seconds ahead of Mika Häkkinen in third place, who is 2 seconds ahead of Wendlinger in fourth. Katayama is 11 seconds behind Wendlinger, and he's fifth. Katayama. Sixth is Fittipaldi, and there is still 6 seconds between Fittipaldi, the last points scorer at the moment, and Damon Hill, who is in seventh place. And Schumacher has now lapped everybody up to, but not including, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who is in 8th position. And the problem in the pit lane, as you can see, continues.
And back on the circuit, we've got Martin Brundle in 9th place, and 11th place is Mark Blundell in the Tyrrell, with Johnny Herbert in the Lotus, having a difficult time with the Lotus back in 12th place. Lotus still relying on their 1993 car with the older version of the Mugen, which is some 45 kilos of the car, 45 kilos overweight.
Well, Wendlinger was held up by Katayama there, who had been passed by Mika Häkkinen, and Katayama will know he's in 5th position, that he's fighting for places, and he's probably not all that aware of the aggregate situation, and he knows that Wendlinger is one of the men against him, and he would be anxious not to let him get past. But Wendlinger has, and is now attacking Mika Häkkinen on lap 51 in what should be a 58-lap race. And as that caption shows you, the two men that you are watching, who are 3rd and 4th, are separated by just over 2.5 seconds, they being both team members who are looking for a third place for their current teams, because McLaren Peugeot have yet to finish on the rostrum, the top 3 places, as have Sauber. Sauber had a 4th place here last year when JJ Leto took that position, 4th position for the Sauber Ilmor team as it was then. It's the Sauber Mercedes team now. We're on lap 51, coming up towards the closing stages of it, and that is a replay of what happened. You see Michele Alboretto's car with the wheel bouncing off. It's obviously, I really don't know, but I would think it's more likely that the wheel wasn't put on than that he hit something. If you remember, Nigel Mansell had a similar problem in the Portuguese Grand Prix the year before last, when the wheel nut wasn't put on properly. The wheel came off as he was exiting the pit lane, and it takes virtually no time at all for a car to build up to 100 miles an hour. That is De Cesaris, who has retired from 10th position in the closing stages of this unhappy race.
Interestingly, De Cesaris is the most experienced driver in Grand Prix, although you wouldn't believe it looking at that. He's finished, or certainly started, 190 Grand Prix in his career. He's been off throughout the winter, having driven for Tyrrell last year, and was drawn into the Jordan team after the Eddie Irvine suspension, and has had a difficult time. The Jordan team have had a very difficult time too, with De Cesaris being in that position. He crashed in testing at Mugello, and here we have a replay.
Yes, you saw the wheel fly off Alboretto's car. I hope I'm not maligning the team when I suggest that the wheel may not have been put on properly. But it didn't. It's not a situation where you would expect him to hit another car forcibly enough to remove a rear wheel. And there are now only 12 cars running out of the 25 who started this race.
No, I certainly agree there, Murray. There is nothing in the pit lane that can be hit that would certainly cause a wheel to come off, apart from the pit wall, and then it would have been the other side. But De Cesaris, he crashed in testing at Mugello, he crashed in practice yesterday, and he's also, of course, gone off the track again here today. And that's Damon Hill,
who is now in the points in 6th position on aggregate. So this would move him up to second equal in the World Championship with Rubens Barrichello, both on 7 points. If Damon stays where he is now, he might actually catch Fittipaldi on aggregate, because there is only 1 second between them, and Damon Hill is lapping 2 seconds a lap faster than Fittipaldi. In fact, I think there's little doubt at all that Damon would finish in 5th position. I can't see him catching Wendlinger, because there's 14 seconds between them, and Damon is only lapping about 1 second faster than Wendlinger in a race which, if my mathematics are correct, has only got 6 laps to run, including the one that we're on now. And Michael Schumacher is now up to Damon Hill, who is in 6th place. Michael having lapped Yukio Katayama, who is in 7th. And the German really is now just maintaining his race rhythm. He's not looking for any histrionics. He's not looking to break any records. He just wants to keep his rhythm going. His rhythm being a lap in about 1 minute 25 seconds, which is faster than everybody, even though he's got a 43-second lead. And I would expect him soon to catch and pass 6th place man Damon Hill.
It certainly is that. It certainly is a lot faster than anybody, but it's still some 3 seconds slower than he went in qualifying, and with just 6 laps to go here, he can be expected to have a pretty low fuel load. So he's probably, by his terms, relatively cruising, and with a Grand Prix car, with a Grand Prix driver at the wheel, once one is 1 or 2 seconds off maximum pace, it really is pretty straightforward to drive at that speed. It does not feel particularly quick to the driver. He's very much coasting along and pacing himself, and I know that Benetton team had a little bit of a concern about reliability here when the Zetec engine first came out. They came testing here and had 1 or 2 problems with it, as one would have expected, but they've certainly done their homework. They've got it together. This is a stressful circuit for engines, but he certainly seems to be showing no signs whatsoever of any problems at the moment.
You watch Nicola Larini, who is indeed going to bring a Ferrari home in 2nd place for the 2nd race in succession if he can keep it going for another 5 laps, including the one he's on. That is Häkkinen, who is 3rd. Damon Hill has made the fastest lap of the race so far, 1.8 seconds inside the previous lap record, and he's now up into 5th position, so he's going to get at least 2 World Championship points if he finishes where he is now at worst, and that means to say that he would move up to 2nd position in the World Championship ahead of the absent Rubens Barrichello. That's Wendlinger, who is in 4th place still, chasing Mika Häkkinen, and the stretcher is still in the pit lane.
Sauber, interestingly, or rather Ilmor, the Mercedes-Benz engine manufacturer there, they tried pneumatic valves for the first time of the engine's development on Friday. They had a few problems with it, and it's been reverted back to the older specification engine with metal springs for valve springs. The benefit of the pneumatics being that one can rev an engine higher, and of course the higher you can rev an engine, the more power it can produce.
And it looked to me like a Lotus mechanic, not a Ferrari mechanic, judging by the overalls. And I noticed that there were Lotus mechanics as the ambulance comes into the pit lane in attendance as the stretcher was wheeled away. Well, I think as far as everybody here is concerned, the finish of the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix cannot come a second too soon. Wendlinger is now going quicker and is up into 4th position. Down to 6th on aggregate has gone Damon Hill. This is a replay of what happened with that bouncing wheel. You see the crowd running as Alboreto offline by virtue of the fact that his wheel had come off, and he would probably, even though the Minardi team is only about 2/3 of the way down the pit lane, be getting on towards 90 miles an hour at least as he exited the pit lane. Fittipaldi retires. He was in 5th position, which will help Damon Hill. Out goes the footwork Ford, and of course that's awful news for them because Gianni Morbidelli, who was going so well, has also retired. In fact, I'm just trying to work out, there's about 10 cars left in the race now. There's only 10 less than 2 laps behind race leader and potential winner Michael Schumacher, who is coming home to complete another lap, closing up on Yukio Katayama, who is now down in 7th position.
A great shame for the footwork team there, who are still using the older Series 7 spec HB engines. It looked like Morbidelli had some kind of technical problem. There didn't seem to be any evidence of the car having done any more than just pulled off, whereas there for Fittipaldi, almost certainly he maybe braked too late, lost control under braking and ended up spinning off into that sand trap. So probably a driver mistake for Fittipaldi.
Lap 57. 2 laps to go. That'll be including this one. So it's this lap and the next one. And as I said, there will be a lot of thankful hearts that this Grand Prix is finishing. And I think it's the first time I've ever said that in the vein that I'm saying it now. As you watch Nicola Larini coming through to complete the lap, chasing Michael Schumacher, now 50 seconds behind him. And as you see from the caption, we are indeed, if they just go the distance remaining, going to have a Ferrari in 2nd place again, a Benetton winning a race for the 3rd time in succession this year. And remember that Schumacher won in Portugal last year, so Benetton would have won 4 of the last 6 races. And interestingly, for statisticians and historians, this would be the 6th consecutive race that the Ford V8 engine that so many people said wouldn't hold a candle to the V10s and the V12s has won an astounding record. Schumacher is now on his last lap. Larini is 52 seconds behind him. Häkkinen is about 15 seconds behind Larini, but only 3 seconds ahead of Wendlinger, who is 4th. Katayama has been lapped, is 5th. Damon Hill is 6th in the points and a lap behind, ahead of Heinz-Harald Frenzen's Sauber in 7th place. Martin Brundle is 8th, so it really does look as though both the McLarens are going to finish with their Peugeot engines.
It's been a particularly impressive performance from Häkkinen in the McLaren, and the Peugeot engine has stood the pace here. It's been hot, it's survived well, and it looks like to be the first time we're going to see a McLaren Peugeot on the rostrum with 3rd place, but it's not been anything other than a dreadful weekend for everybody involved, and it's going to be a major black mark on Formula One, or certainly in the history books, for a long time.
Michael Schumacher comes down to the Rivazza for the 58th time, and he's nearly a minute now ahead of the 2nd place man as he comes home, certainly to win commandingly and with a great deal of credit in very difficult circumstances, his 3rd successive Grand Prix. He exits the Traguardo, and the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix has been won by Michael Schumacher, but in circumstances that I'm sure he will not be at all happy about, and that is no reflection on him, his ability or his car. Nicola Larini will please the thousands and thousands of his countrymen who are watching here at San Marino, because, as I said, this is the 2nd Grand Prix in succession that a Ferrari will have finished in 2nd position, because Gerhard Berger was 2nd at the AIDA circuit at the Pacific Grand Prix 2 weeks ago, and Larini comes into the closing stages of the last lap now, just this left-hander and the right-hander before he sees the checkered flag. It's going to be closer for third position as Larini finishes second, between Mika Hakkinen in the McLaren Peugeot, who looks as though he is about to create history by getting the first rostrum position for the Anglo-French partnership. There he is, and that is the distance he beats Karl Wendlinger's Black Sauber by for third position. So Hakkinen third, Wendlinger in fourth. Katayama has already finished his race because he's lapped in a meritorious fifth position for the second time this year. Damon Hill gets one World Championship point for sixth position in the second Williams Renault, which lifts him to second position in the World Championship, equal with the absent Rubens Barrichello. Michael Schumacher naturally pleased. He's had as hard a time as anybody as Christian Fittipaldi rides back on the side pod of Heinz-Harald Frenzen's Sauber Mercedes. Well, there's no point in trying to pretend that it has been anything other than a very, very unhappy San Marino Grand Prix weekend. But the one piece of good news I can give you is that Michael Schumacher has won, that Damon Hill has finished in sixth position, sandwiching between them Nicola Larini second, Mika Hakkinen third, Wendlinger fourth, and Yukio Katayama in fifth place.
And that's the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. The history books will show that victory for Michael Schumacher, but it will also record one of the bleakest weekends that world motorsport has ever seen, a catalogue of tragedy and disaster. We had the death of the Austrian Roland Ratzenberger yesterday. The afternoon here began with a start line accident, a tyre into the crowd, although the injuries there, we understand, were slight. We've had a rogue tyre down the pit lane. We don't yet know the extent of the injuries there. But we've also got Ayrton Senna, one of the greatest talents that Formula One has ever seen, currently lying in a Bologna hospital in a coma with what's reported to be grave head injuries. As you can imagine, nobody wants to volunteer an opinion or an emotion down the pit lane here until the time is absolutely right, and the time certainly isn't right now. We're not going to push them into that. Suffice to say that when it is appropriate, we'll have further details from Imola before the end of the programme. Good evening. If you've tuned in tonight expecting the outstanding race that the San Marino Grand Prix here at Imola promised to be, then I'm sorry, that's not the programme we have for you. Instead, the sport of Formula One tonight is in deep mourning. Yesterday we had the loss of Roland Ratzenberger, the first Formula One racing fatality for 12 years. And today we've lost, arguably, the greatest talent of his generation. After a high-speed crash at Tamburello, Ayrton Senna is dead. Like Ratzenberger yesterday and Barrichello on Friday, it was a violent accident and its cause remains a mystery. There was enormous shock around the circuit, but for a while there was hope. Senna was seen to move. He required a great deal of attention at the crash site and was then taken by helicopter to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna and straight into intensive care. And when the first bulletins were issued, the hope started to fade. Senna had grave head injuries, was in a coma for a while, his heart stopped beating. He was revived, but at 6:30 local time came the news that Senna was clinically dead. The last hope was gone, a great star was lost. The San Marino Grand Prix weekend had begun with the dramatic accident that Rubens Barrichello miraculously survived, with only minor injuries. But the next day, the miracles ran out, and Roland Ratzenberger, in only his second Grand Prix, became the first race-meeting fatality that Formula One had suffered in 12 years. The next was tragically barely 24 hours away. And race day today had other potential tragedies. At the start, Pedro Lamy in the Lotus failed to avoid a stalled JJ Leto. A tyre flew into the crowd, injuring 8 spectators, none seriously. Both drivers were unhurt. Later in the afternoon, a tyre and bodywork flew off Michele Alboretto's Minardi as it sped out of the pit lane. 4 mechanics, 2 from Ferrari, 2 from Lotus, needed hospital treatment. So it's been a dreadful day, and the loss of Ayrton Senna is really tough to comprehend. He qualified yesterday with his 65th pole position of his career. If he'd gone on to take the victory that everyone predicted, it would have been his 42nd in Grand Prix motor racing. He was 3 times a winner here at San Marino. He was 3 times a world champion. Here's the thoughts of our commentary team. Murray Walker, an overwhelming sense of sadness here today. What kind of talent, what kind of star has the sport lost today?
Well, I can still hardly comprehend that it's happened, Steve. I remember Ayrton Senna, and it seems terrible to have to use those words, as a tremendously intense man who was determined to achieve his goals. He came here as an unknown Brazilian who couldn't speak English. He came to a cold climate. He lived a long way away from home, but he applied himself 1,000% to his craft. He succeeded in all the categories that he was in until he got to Formula One. He very nearly won a Grand Prix in his first year. He then went on to become a 3 times world champion. And as far as I'm concerned, and I do see all of them, he was a man who was always courteous, always considerate, always helpful, and he was a man of his word. If you wanted to talk to him, he would say, yes, come and see me after qualifying, and you might have to wait a long time, but you always got him. On top of that, he was a tremendously successful businessman. He was much loved by his family and all his friends around him. And it is a truly dreadful, dreadful blow to motorsport.
You've seen most of the great Grand Prix drivers there have been. Where would you place Ayrton Senna among those?
Oh, I would unhesitatingly place him in the top 3. I think I would place him with Nuvolari and with Jim Clark, and I would put Stirling Moss in the same bracket. But you can't speak about many drivers in the same breath as you can Ayrton Senna.
How does the sport now handle a loss, if it can? Formula One has an image problem now?
Well, what I'm going to say, Steve, may sound callous, and I don't mean it to, but Grand Prix racing, motor racing, is an extremely dangerous sport. It always has been. It always will be. It's in the nature of the sport. The drivers who take part in it know that something like this, in their heart of hearts, could happen to them. They wouldn't do it if they knew it was going to happen to them. But they accept the risks because the passion is worth the risk. And that's what they want to do. And I don't think anything ought to be done to stop them. It's happened in the past. It will happen again. All I can say is that it has happened on this occasion to a truly great man, and although it's a cliche, he will be desperately, desperately missed, and Formula One is going to be stunned for the whole of the rest of this season.
Jonathan Palmer, amid all the great sadness, the sport has to ask itself, why have there been 2 fatalities in just 2 days? There must be a reason.
That's certainly a logical question, but I can't help thinking that it is the most tragic of coincidence overall. I think it's important to recognise that from what we know, neither of these 2 accidents had anything to do with drivers wrestling with their cars, trying to overdrive it and losing control purely through trying to go quickly. I think in both situations, in both circumstances, something has broken, possibly with the car, possibly some debris on the circuit, possibly a tyre. There has been some outside influence rendering the driver no chance of controlling the vehicle. And with the very high speeds that we see here at Imola, plus the fact that those high speeds are seen on swerving parts of the circuit, the car will almost certainly go off the road and hit the concrete walls on either side.
But we talked before the race, with the change in regulations, there are new and greater demands on drivers this year.
Yes, there are. We've seen changes in regulations removing active suspension, which only had 1 year of prevalence in Formula One after all. You know, we've been using the sorts of suspension that we have now for decades in the past. So non-active suspension is not new. And indeed, nor is getting rid of traction control. Traction control is undoubtedly an aid to safety in the same way that ABS braking is an aid to safety under braking. But of course, it does remove driver influence. And it's always been very important to Formula One to have the driver being in as much control of the car as possible and his skills influencing the car's performance. But again, those kind of changes, particularly removing traction control, sure has meant the cars have been harder to drive, but really at the slower parts of the circuit, It's easier to spin the cars, but once again I emphasise that these two incidents had nothing to do with drivers losing control of their vehicles while pushing them to the limit. In both circumstances, the cars left the road when they should have been capable of rounding the corners without any problem whatsoever, well within the limits of both the drivers and the cars. Something went wrong in both occasions.
You raced against Ayrton Senna. What a great talent the sport has lost today.
It's absolutely devastating. I think everybody is totally numb about the thing. To my mind, he was the best driver Grand Prix racing had ever seen. Different people have different views, but I think the guy was quite exceptional and is a dreadful loss to the world of motorsport.
There'll be more on a great racing driver in a special tribute programme at 2:20 on Wednesday afternoon, BBC Two. We had a race today, two-part race in which Michael Schumacher made it 3 wins out of 3 for Benetton. Nicola Larini added some joy to the day with second place for Ferrari, Hakkinen third for McLaren, with Damon Hill completing the top 6. Schumacher now dominates the World Championship with maximum points from the first 3 rounds. The next round in Monaco in 2 weeks' time takes place without one of Monaco's most famous residents, Ayrton Senna. As a result, there was no champagne on the podium after the race this afternoon. There really was nothing to celebrate, even for Michael Schumacher.
Just win the race, but I can't feel satisfied, can't feel happy. I mean, what happened this weekend, never have seen something like this. Not just one thing, so many things. The only thing I can say about this is I hope we learn from this. I think there is a lot to learn from, and we have to use this. And things like this, they shouldn't happen without taking the experience from it. It's the only thing I want to say and I can say.
I've known Ayrton Senna and had the genuine pleasure of interviewing Ayrton Senna ever since his early days in Formula Ford and Formula 3 back in the early 80s. And to my mind, he was one of the most talented, motivated, focused and lucid sportsmen that I've ever come across. Formula One this evening is mourning the loss of not one but 2 drivers, Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna.